Welcome, welcome, welcome. Great times. Welcome, everybody. So glad for you to be here. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. The notifications bell if you want to be notified of upcoming streams. Welcome, everybody. So glad you're here. Don't know why I'm doing this thing where I start 7 minutes late. Not really my style. I like to do everything on time, but lately, for some reason, that's how things are going. But yes, here we are, folks. Here we are. So glad to see all of you. So the way we're going to do it tonight is tonight, I'm going to do it special. I mean, it'll be roughly the same format that we always do. I give my opening remarks. Then we do the roll call, and then after that, I answer your super chats until the super chats run out. That'll generally be the style tonight, except tonight will be special because I have a special message for third worldists tonight. It'll be a special message for third worldists, number one. And number two, I will be concluding my opening remarks by singing a song dedicated to Jason Unruhe. I will actually sing a song dedicated to Jason Unruhe. So glad you could all be here. I love this community. We do great stuff. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell, and be sure to post this wherever videos are posted, Reddit, Twitter, Facebook, Bunker Chan, wherever you want to post videos, you can do that. So welcome everybody. Welcome everybody. I'm writing the super chats down, religious beliefs. Writing the super chats down because that's the second half of the show. You guys make the second half of the show happen. Opening remarks, then roll call, and then answering super chat questions. That's how it works. So get ready. At the conclusion of my opening remarks, I will sing you a song dedicated to Jason Unruhe, our new rival, our former friend turned rival. And there we go. There we go. That's how it will happen. That's how it will happen. I'm seeing a couple super chats here I should write down. Right. Lab. All right. Are we ready, folks? We're going to jump right into my opening remarks. We're going to jump right in to my opening remarks. Folks, I am giving my opening remarks tonight as a message to those of us who have the third worldist perspective, those of us who argue that it is impossible to have socialism in a Western capitalist country, that because of imperialism, because the working class benefits too much from imperialism, that it is hopeless to try and win over people in the United States to anti-imperialism and socialism, that are, that perspective that says we're all too comfortable enjoying the spoils of imperialism. I am going to give a message specifically geared to people that are infected with that viewpoint. And I want to actually talk about the inspiration for this. So, as many of you know, I have, many ancestors, as do all of us human beings. Not all of my ancestors were good. I had some bad ancestors who were up to some not so good stuff. But there was one of my ancestors that I'm particularly proud of. And his name was Charles G. Finney. Charles G. Finney. And he was a minister. And Charles G. Finney was actually right here in New York City. He was a well-known pastor and minister in New York City during the 1830s and 40s. And he was very opposed to slavery. And he would not allow anyone who was involved in slave trade to receive the communion in his church. If you were involved in any business that was involved in slavery, you could not receive communion in his church. And he eventually moved his congregation out to Ohio. And he set up Oberlin College, Charles G. Finney. And Charles G. Finney, the abolitionist and the minister, who was my ancestor, according to what my mother's family have told me. Finney is my mother's maiden name. It's the last name of my mother's side of the family, and we are from Ohio. And apparently, I am related to this person, Charles G. Finney. You can look at his Wikipedia page. Apparently, Charles G. Finney was very famous for his oratory style. He was kind of the father of tent revival preaching, right? Right? Okay. Golly. British. All right. And one of the things that Charles G. Finney often did, Third World. Is that when he did his various preaching to people to win them over to his religious viewpoint, one thing that he would do is he would set up a bench that he would have at the front of his tent revival prayer service. And that bench was called the anxious bench. And that bench was for people who were doubting their faith. They were doubting their faith, and he would ask them to sit in the anxious bench, and then he would preach his sermon specifically to them, to the people in the chair, in the anxious bench. And the congregation would listen to it, and they would follow his preaching, and they would follow his style, and they would kind of be watching the people on the anxious bench to see if they were moved by the minister's words. And so the audience and the minister would be kind of working together, playing off each other, trying to convince the people on the anxious bench to come to terms with their faith. He was performatively persuading people, and it was a very effective style. Very, very effective style. Capitalism and social Darwinism was a very effective style. And so tonight, I am going to imagine that those of us watching who are of this third worldist persuasion and say that there is no hope for building socialism in the United States, that say it's hopeless, we're all bought off labor aristocrats and Euro settlers, we benefit too much from imperialism, there's no hope for building a socialist and working class movement in the Western countries. For those of you infected with that viewpoint, you are sitting on the anxious bench. And I am going to be preaching especially to you tonight. But all the other people that are watching along, all the people that are listening, all the people that don't agree with that and think we can build a movement, they are watching as well. And together, those of us who believe we can build a socialist movement in the United States, those of us who are committed to all of this, myself being the speaker, we are all pulling together to try and win you away from your third worldist viewpoint and to join the struggle to bring down American imperialism and build a revolutionary working class movement here in the center of the empire. Our preaching tonight, our audience tonight will be working together, the audience and myself, and we are going to try and get you to change your perspective. That is how we're going to do it tonight, and after I have given my message to Maoist third worldists and people who are infected with this viewpoint, then I will sing you a nice song dedicated to Jason, and then I'll just answer your super chats for the rest of the night. So that's how we're going to roll. That is how the cookie crumbles, and that is how we're going to do it. So get comfortable, and here we go. It's important when talking about politics to differentiate between what is true and what is our feeling. It's a very, very important thing to do. When we have a very strong feeling, we can often go and search for things in the political discourse that match our feeling. And if your feeling is that there is no hope for socialism in the United States, if your feeling is that the people of the Western countries are too bought off, if your feeling is that You feel an intense amount of alienation from the society that you live in. You feel a huge amount of anger at the people in the country you live in for not being anti-imperialist enough, not being anti-capitalist enough, being too racist, being too individualist, being too social chauvinistic. That is your feeling. You can certainly find paragraphs and selections from the writings of Vladimir Lenin and even from Frederick Engels and others that will confirm your feeling. And what makes it worse is that many of the Marxist groups in the United States do not address this question directly. They don't address the question of labor aristocracy. They don't address this question at all. They simply gloss over it. Well, I am here tonight to address the question. So first of all, what is imperialism? Imperialism is not a policy. Imperialism is not something a country engages in. Imperialism is not one country attacking another country. No. Imperialism, as Lenin understood it, is a global economic system. Imperialism is when banks and corporations based in Western countries dominate the global economy. Imperialism is what Vladimir Lenin called capitalism in its monopoly stage. Under capitalism, the worker is not paid the full value of what he produces, so he is subject to exploitation. But under imperialism, workers across the developing world are not simply subject to exploitation, they are subject to super exploitation. And furthermore, the regular capitalist makes profits. But because the giant banks and corporations of the United States, the big oil firms and monopolies that dominate the United States, because they sit at the center of a global financial system, and because they are super exploiting people, because they are raking in revenue from all across the planet, they don't simply make profits, they make super profits. And in this global system of monopoly capitalism, it is not simply workers who are exploited. Rather, it is entire nations, entire continents that are exploited. Africa is ground into poverty. Asia has suffered horrendously. The Caribbean, South and Central America, all across the planet, there are countries where the people are not having access to electricity, not having access to running water, not having access to modern education and literacy. They are kept in chronic poverty, in some cases, even still today in semi-feudal conditions. Also that Wall Street and London monopolist corporations can maintain a monopoly. And that global setup that I am describing is called imperialism. It is imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And as a global system, it is the expansion of the monopolies and huge multinational corporations based in Western countries. It is the expansion of them onto a global stage. And part of what makes imperialism work, as Vladimir Lenin explained, is the aristocracy of labor. In fact, the term aristocracy of labor was invented in this country by Daniel de Leon. Daniel de Leon, who was a leader, founder of the Socialist Labor Party, well-known Marxist agitator, he came up with the concept of the aristocracy of labor. He argued that there were some workers in the skilled trades who made enough money that they lost their revolutionary potential, and he called them the aristocracy of labor. And Vladimir Lenin picked up this term and adopted it and in an essay that he wrote called Imperialism and the Split in Socialism. And the essay talked about why World War I happened. World War I happened not simply because of the capitalist system, but because there was a section of the working class movement, the Labour Party in Britain, the German Social Democratic Party, the various French socialist groups, even some socialists in the United States. World War I happened because some among the socialist movement, misleaders among the organized labor movement and among the working class movement in the United States and elsewhere among the socialist groups, misleaders allowed it to happen. Right? The socialists around the world, the Second International, had a meeting before World War I, where they promised that never would they support a war of the capitalists, but they changed their minds, and the various socialist parties sold out their pledge, and they supported World War I. And Lenin was furious about this. He said that the Second International was a stinking corpse, that the global anti-capitalist movement had been sold down the river. Workers were being sent to kill other workers and die. 20 million workers were sent to their deaths in World War I so that the capitalists and imperialists could divide up and carve up the world among themselves. And it was horrendous. And Lenin explained how it could happen, arguing that within the Western countries, a strata had developed among the working class that benefit from imperialism, that because of the fact that they are operating in the center of global empires, they get some of the spoils, and they get privilege, and they get a higher standard of living, and that this breaks their solidarity with lower paid workers in their own country, and it makes them sympathetic to the imperialist aims of their domestic ruling class. In Lenin's time, it was a divide between what they called the skilled workers and the unskilled workers, the skilled workers versus the unskilled workers. And those workers who were considered themselves to be skilled and were members of the American Federation of Labor, they often had unions that were racist, or whites only. They only allowed people born in the United States, no foreign-born workers. You had to go through an apprenticeship to be in the union. These were pipe fitters, construction trades, plumbers, etc. And they refused to work in solidarity with industrial workers. They wouldn't organize industrial workers. And the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, was very, very conservative and supported World War I. Meanwhile, it was the IWW, the industrial workers of the world, that they opposed World War I. And the industrial workers of the world organized, quote-unquote, unskilled workers, coal miners in Colorado, and lumberjacks out west, and textile workers, and other workers who were not considered to be skilled by the capitalists. And this divide between the skilled and the unskilled, the giving of privilege to the skilled workers, the higher standard of living that the skilled workers had, the privilege that they had in relation to non-white workers, in relation to workers born in foreign countries, this laid the basis for dividing the working class movement and having a big section of the working class movement sell out and support World War I. And this happened, and this is a reality, and this is the concept of the aristocracy of labor. But what did Lenin say at the end of his very important essay, Imperialism and the Split in Socialism? What did he say at the very end of it? He said that it was the responsibility of the socialist movement to go lower and deeper to the real masses and to expose the social chauvinists. He ends that important essay with that very, very important quote. He says, "Our job is to go lower and deeper to the real masses and to expose the social chauvinists." He doesn't say our job is to therefore give up. He doesn't say our job is to therefore throw in the towel. No, he says that our job is to expose the elements of the working class movement that are supporting war and supporting imperialism and go lower and deeper to the real masses. That is our responsibility. Now, obviously, a lot of things have changed since 1913 or 1914. A lot of things have changed since that time. But at the time that Lenin understood there was the development of the aristocracy of labor, he pointed out that these privileges that the aristocracy of labor had were only temporary. They were temporary privileges, that the capitalists would look for any moment to get away from having to pay higher wages to the skilled workers. They would look for any moment to avoid having to pay higher wages. They would prefer not to pay higher wages, but because of unique circumstances, some workers were in a position where they got paid higher wages, and as a result of that, they had their consciousness changed. Now, obviously, a lot of things happened since then. You had the 1930s and the Great Depression. And during the Great Depression, you had the Communist Party that said, don't starve, fight, and organized unemployment councils. and demanded the creation of things like unemployment insurance, and went out into the streets and fought. You organized veterans for their bonus march, their bonus army, where they occupied the Capitol, demanding the payment of veterans' benefits. And then you had the rise of the CIO, right? The Congress of Industrial Organizations. The CIO was a section of the AFL that believed in organizing industrial workers, that rejected the idea of not organizing workers unless they were quote unquote skilled. They walked out and they led the sit-down strike wave. And in Flint, Michigan, and in Akron, Ohio, and in Missouri, and in New York City, all across the country, workers occupied their factories demanding the right to a union. And the industrial union movement burst onto the scene. And then you had the Second World War. And after the Second World War, you had the post-war economic boom. And those industrial workers who were organized into unions were able to go on strike right after the Second World War. They had the post-war strike wave of 1946, where the steel workers who hadn't gotten a raise since the beginning of World War II, and the auto workers who hadn't gotten a raise since the beginning of World War II, and the coal miners, and all the workers throughout the United States who hadn't gotten a raise since the beginning of World War II, went out on strike in 1946, the post-war strike wave. Just as the Cold War was beginning, there was a strike wave across the United States. And all kinds of unions went on strike, and they won. And they won, and they won, and they won. And the wages of auto workers in the United States after World War II, after the post-war strike wave, went up. And the wages of steel workers in the United States after World War II went up. And the wages of meatpacking workers in the United States went up. And all across the unionized industrial jobs in the United States, there were huge victories for organized labor. And why was that? It was because the capitalists at that point, the capitalists of the United States, were making more profits than they'd ever made before. Because all of the major cities across Western Europe had been bombed and destroyed. And the whole world was buying steel from the United States, because all the steel mills in France and Germany and Japan had been bombed and destroyed. And the whole world was buying cars from the United States. Why? Because all the steel mills and all the car manufacturing facilities in Britain and in China and in Germany and in Belgium had been destroyed by the war. And it was because of the fact that the capitalists of the United States were sitting at the center of a world that had just been bombed and destroyed, and that we were entering the longest period of economic growth in all of human history, which was the post-World War II economic expansion. The standard of living in the United States shot up because the capitalists of the United States had so much they could afford to take some losses, and they could afford to buy class peace. And they made huge concessions. And that's where you get that 1950s white picket fence, lifestyle, right? Leave it to Beaver, the white picket fence and the suburbs, and, the middle class, the industrial middle class of the United States, where somebody who didn't have a high school diploma, who worked in an industrial job on a steel mill, or in an auto plant, or in a meatpacking facility, made enough money to have a very, very cushy, comfortable lifestyle. That was a result of unique historical circumstances, and that was a huge expansion of the aristocracy of labor, right? There was a huge section of the U.S. working class that suddenly had a higher standard of living than they'd ever had before. And because of that, their consciousness changed. And you had first McCarthyism. And there was a purge of communists. Communists were kicked out of the unions. Communists were put in prison. They had a Red Scare. And that population thought, wow, my standard of living has just gone up. I've got a comfortable life. They had these fancy new devices called televisions that people were watching that psyched them up. My ideological journey. That psyched them up and got them all pumped up about the evils of communism. And that middle class, that newly created industrial middle class of labor aristocrats, was key in purging and carrying out McCarthyism and the Red Scare. Well, that happened. And the post-World War II economic expansion kept going throughout the 1960s. The standard of living kept rising. The economy kept doing well. However, there were problems in the United States under the surface. Sure, it was a good economy, But for black people, it wasn't a good economy. Black people were the last hired and the first fired. In the South, they lived under Jim Crow segregation. In the North, they were ghettoized, terrorized by police, living in poverty conditions. And so you had the civil rights movement and the rise of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and you had Minister Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam and black nationalism in the northern industrial centers. And then later, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., in the final years of his life, started organizing against poverty and doing anti-poverty campaigns. You had the rise of the Black Panthers that organized things like free breakfast programs and armed patrols against police brutality. And you had the black working class in motion in response to being oppressed and living in poverty conditions and facing discrimination, etc. Meanwhile, you had this thing called the Vietnam War. And many young working class people who had grown up in a very comfortable middle class existence with parents who had fought in the Second World War didn't like the idea of going to Vietnam and didn't like the idea of getting drafted to fight in Vietnam. And on college campuses, young people burned their draft cards. They marched against the Vietnam War. They said, hell no, we won't go. They educated themselves about the war, right? You're being asked to go and fight and die in another country. You ought to do some research. And they did some research, and they discovered that the people of Vietnam were fighting for their country. They were fighting for national liberation, and that the USA had no right to tell the Vietnamese people what kind of government they should have. And so many young people refused to fight in Vietnam. Anti-Vietnam War protests expanded. 1969, you had a big political crisis in the United States. Protests all across college campuses, urban rebellions. Every major city in the United States in 1968 went up in flames after Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. You had the rise of the Black Panthers. You had various communist groups that were recruiting in big numbers, the Progressive Labor Party and the Revolutionary Union and the Weathermen, SDS Weathermen, Revolutionary Youth Movement, they were called, and a lot of interest in communism. You had a domestic political crisis. You did not have an economic crisis. You had a political crisis. Young people didn't want to fight in the wars. Young white people, black people were rebelling and fighting for their rights. But the economy was overall good. And how was it that the political crisis of 1969 to 1972, or 1968 to 1972, how was it defeated? How was it defeated? With the labor aristocracy. There's an old country song. I bet you've probably heard if you ever listen to country music. It's a classic, a favorite country song. Came out in 1969. I'm proud to be an Okie from Muskogee. Ever hear it? By Merrill Haggard. It's a song that's against leftists and against the anti-war movement, right? They don't smoke marijuana in Muskogee. It's about some quaint little town where the people there don't protest wars and don't riot. They just love their country and are patriotic and are not hippies. Leather boots are still in style for manly footwear. Beads and Roman sandals can't be seen. Football's still the roughest game on campus, and the kids there still respect the college dean. Right? It was all about how there was, beyond the campuses, the college campuses, beyond the black community in the urban centers, there was a layer of U.S. society that didn't like the anti-war protesters and didn't like the black liberation struggle, was afraid of the black liberation struggle. And because of that, there had to be a mobilization of the aristocracy of labor to beat back the political crisis. And Richard Nixon moved in as a kind of Bonapartist figure, mobilizing a layer of workers they called the hard hats. They were the hard hats. And they were, middle class kind of, construction workers and average working class people who were supporters of Richard Nixon and hated hippies. And they were labor aristocrats. And the hard hat riots of May 1970, you can Google this. In New York City, they had the hard hat riots where a bunch of construction workers went out and beat up anti-war protesters, attacked anti-war protesters with baseball bats and hammers and construction tools. It was pretty awful. The hard hat riots, they were called. And that was an example of the labor aristocracy. The aristocracy of labor, those privileged workers who were making very high wages, were threatened by the anti-war movement, by the black liberation struggle. And so in defense of their privilege, they went out and they beat up the anti-war protesters. That happened. That absolutely happened. And so when you talk about labor aristocracy existing, you're right. And when you talk about this being a big problem for revolutionaries and socialists in the United States, you're right. And when you talk about how there's a layer of workers who have benefited from imperialism, and because of that, their consciousness has changed, you're right. You were right about all of that. And the problem with the socialist movement is that there's no one who can talk about this, right? We should talk about this. We can talk about this. Labor aristocracy is a real phenomenon. It's a real phenomenon. It is definitely a real phenomenon. You know, you can go even further after that, right? After the political crisis ended from 1968 to 1972, after Richard Nixon had kind of stabilized the country, after the Vietnam War was over, when Richard Nixon was being impeached in the Watergate scandal, as U.S. society was turning to normal, there were a number of people throughout the United States who had become radicalized during that time, right? They'd gotten interested in communism. They set out to build a new communist party. They called themselves the New Communist Movement. And there were 5 or 6 different communist groups that were formed during this time. The Communist Workers' Party, the Communist Labor Party, the Revolutionary Communist Party, the October League, or the Communist Party Marxist-Leninist, the Communist Party USA Marxist-Leninist. There were a lot of different groups. And these folks did exactly what one is supposed to do when they're a communist. They went and they got jobs in factories and working class communities. They sold communist newspapers to their co-workers. They tried to build an organization among working class communities fighting for communism. But overwhelmingly, they saw that the communities they went to try and organize didn't want to hear it. Right? This was still the aristocracy of labor. And even though you had the end of the post-World War II economic expansion, you had 1973 and the oil crisis and the Nixon shocks, you were starting to have economic problems, there was still enough of this comfortable white middle class that did not want to hear what communists had to say. That was a reality. And then there was an economic downturn. There was an economic downturn that happened in 1978, 79. The U.S. economy crashed. And a lot of the communist groups went into a panic. And they thought, it's now or never. It's now or never, right? If we don't do something now the standard of living is finally dropping. Here's our chance. And they went out and did some crazy things. The Progressive Labor Party, because they thought that the conservative labor leaders of New York City were holding back the struggle, they attacked the Central Labor Council of New York City. They organized an attack where they went in and they attacked the Central Labor Council of New York City. It was a disaster. And they thought they were going to be fighting the reformist labor leaders and they would inspire workers to resist. Well, it didn't work out that way. Another thing that happened, the Communist Workers' Party challenged the Ku Klux Klan in Greensboro, North Carolina, to a shootout. They said, they had a death to the Klan rally. They sent the KKK a letter. We challenge you to show your faces, you cowards. Well, the Klan did show up and shot 5 of them. It was called the Greensboro Massacre. It was a horrendous occurrence. The Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP, they had a series of May 1st strikes. They first had May Day 1980. May Day 1980 it was called. And they tried to have a general strike on May 1st. And it flopped. Nobody went on strike. It was silliness, right? They went around with T-shirts, I won't work on May 1st, will you? And they called a general strike, but nobody went on strike except for the RCP. It was silly and embarrassing, and these kind of things happen. But it was out of desperation. But what happened was that because the standard of living in the United States was going down for the first time since World War II, the U.S. working class became more reactionary because they saw their privileges slipping away, and they had seen their standard of living rising in the 50s, rising in the 60s, and so they assumed that the problem was the political crisis. They assumed it was the counterculture. They assumed it was the rise in leftism. So you had the Reagan Revolution, the attempt to undo the political crisis of the 1960s. The Reagan Revolution, it was called. And with Ronald Reagan, there was a significant increase in racism. There was a significant increase in mass incarceration. And the working class of the United States was becoming more conservative and going along with it largely. And it was at that moment that the communist movement in the U.S. did what I call the Great Retreat. All the communist groups at that moment, they engaged in what I call the Great Retreat, which was that they decided it can't be done. They decided that the workers, the broad masses of Americans, will never become revolutionary. They will never become communist. They'll never become anti-imperialist. There is no hope for that. And they all found somewhere else to go. They found a place to retreat. The Revolutionary Communist Party, they decided that this meant that the American working class was quote-unquote bourgeoisified, and that it would only be what they called the lumpen proletariat, which was a term they used for urban African Americans, which is not the Marxist understanding of lumpen proletariat. It would only be urban black folks who had revolutionary potential. You had, after that, the Communist Party, Communist Party USA. They announced that Ronald Reagan and his move to the right, this was creeping fascism. So as an emergency tactic, they had to pour all of their support into the Democratic Party, into defeating Ronald Reagan, stopping the danger of nuclear war, that this was creeping fascism. And the Communist Party USA put all of its energy and all of its resources and all of its support into backing the Democrats. And the Workers' World Party, which I used to be a member of years ago, the Workers' World Party, what did they do? Well, they decided that they were going to take over the peace movement. There were a lot of old hippies who still went to protests and still were protesting against wars, so they became the stage managers of the peace movement. And they got the permits and set up the stage, and they were going to take over the peace movement. And that was their strategy. And there was another group. There were some Trotskyite groups that merged and called themselves Solidarity. And they went and got positions in the labor unions. And they tried to infiltrate the labor movement. They run a magazine called Labor Notes. And they got jobs inside the labor bureaucracy. And they're trying to secretly maneuver inside the unions to make them more revolutionary. And a lot of Maoists, people who went on to form the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, a lot of them became college professors and academics, and they got jobs, and they wrote books about white skin privilege and why the workers of the United States couldn't be revolutionary because of their white skin privilege. And they decided that they were going to engage in this postmodern re-examination of Marxism. Right now, they eventually split, and that's a whole other story. But all the communists, in short, all the communist groups decided that it couldn't be done because of their experience during the 1970s and how difficult it was, and because of the Reagan Revolution, they all made a retreat. They ran away to the college campuses. They ran away to hide in the labor bureaucracy. They ran away to kiss up to the Democratic Party. They ran away to stage manage the peace movement of the dying hippies. Spartacus, right? Story. Happy birthday, by the way. They all ran away from doing what needs to be done, which is go to the broad masses of Americans and win them to socialism. They decided you can't do that. We tried it for a decade. It didn't work. And they decided that in about 1981, 1982. But here's the thing, folks. 1981, 1982 was a very, 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 very long time ago. It was a very long time ago. But since that time, since the Reagan Revolution, since the rise of neoliberalism and austerity, since that time, the living standard of average Americans in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Michigan and Ohio has been going down. The rate of household debt in the United States has been going up. The good-paying industrial jobs have been shipped overseas, or in some cases, eliminated by technology. Steel mills, at this point, use exponentially fewer workers. At one point, they would have tens of thousands of workers working in a steel mill. But now, you can operate a steel mill with less than 100 in some cases. In Cleveland, the center of Cleveland, down by the river, right? Cleveland's on Lake Erie, but then there's the river that goes into Lake Erie. They used to have this huge apparatus for making steel. They called it Steel Yards Common, right? The Steel Yards Common. Well, now all those steel mills are gone, and Steel Yards Common in Cleveland is now the home to a giant Walmart, a low-wage service sector employer. It's also a home to a Sam's Club and several other big, low-wage retail employment centers. 2008, millions of Americans had their homes foreclosed. Predatory lending destroyed that neighborhood in the suburbs. Leave It to Beaver, his house got foreclosed on. Leave It to Beaver's dad lost his job at the power plant. And at the same time that the standard of living has been gradually going down and further down, another thing happened, which is that the United States is now far more integrated racially. I'm in LA right now, city devastated. Far more integrated racially. There are people of color all across the United States. There are folks from India all across the United States. There are Middle Eastern folks all across the United States. The idea of purely white neighborhoods, purely white communities, has gradually been eroded. And it was that racism, that segregation, that laid the basis for a lot of the aristocratic privilege and pro-imperialist sentiments among white workers. But that's been broken down. The suburbs are not lily white anymore. The rural areas are not lily white anymore. There is a huge amount of racial integration across the United States. And that racism that was so key in, pumping up the pro-imperialist and reactionary sentiments among white workers, that racism has been largely rolled back. Interracial marriages, interracial dating, interracial communities, interracial basketball teams, interracial football teams, these things are much more common. The country is not segregated as it once was, and that has an effect on consciousness. This country voted overwhelmingly for an African-American president of the United States. So, one of the most key aspects of pushing reactionary sentiments among the broad masses of Americans has been eroded. On top of that, there's been an information revolution. Folks, you are watching me right now from your home, I assume, Saturday night. Where else would you be? Maybe you're watching me as you're driving to work. Maybe you're watching me from work. You're listening to me. You're watching me somewhere. If this was 1980, you would have the choice of watching whatever TV channels you had. But now, because of the information revolution, you have the option of listening to me, a communist guy, talking into my iPhone, in my living room, in my Brooklyn apartment. This is huge. Your access to information is far greater than it once was. You can look up facts and details. You can pull out your phone and get all kinds of information. So at the same time that the standard of living of the U.S. working class has vastly gone down, the U.S. working class has also become far less racist and far less white chauvinist. And on top of that, the U.S. working class has gained far more access to information than ever before. This is not 1980. This is not 1969 and Okie from Muskogee. Vladimir Lenin said that if the situation changes in 24 hours, then the tactics must also change in 24 hours. And the third worldist perspective, the idea that it could never happen because the American people are a bunch of bought-off labor aristocrats, that's debunked, folks. The American people are angry. The American people are ready to fight back. The American people are ready to resist. But right now, there are only two forces that are attempting to mobilize them. Force number one is the libertarians and the right wing, who say, it's not real capitalism. We got to privatize everything. Monopolies only happen because of the government. Biden is a communist. Libertarians are mobilizing them. That was a big part of January 6th, Donald Trump's, events, January 6th. And who else is mobilizing them? The synthetic left. The synthetic left that agrees with third worldists. You're racist. You're sexist. Oh my God, it's so privileged to go out and march for jobs. So many poor people have never had jobs. You should be ashamed. Oh my God. Oh my God. Why are you marching, demanding healthcare and education? That's so class reductionist. Oh my God. Oh my God. You're check your privilege. Oh my God, you're a privileged first world white person. You should be ashamed of yourself. Oh my God, oh my God. I can't believe you would actually march. That's so masculine and white and male. Why would you read books by Karl Marx? He was just some white dude. I read books by Judith Butler. She's not white or anything. Oh my God, that's the two main political currents. Create. Structure. That's the two main currents. The libertarians push economic policies and austerity. The synthetic left pushes an identity politics, guilt trip, group therapy session. Neither of them have the answer, but they are the ones that are trying to mobilize the people of the United States. And they are both leading the American workers off of a cliff. That's where they're leading the American working class. They are leading them off of a cliff. One section of the American working class is being led off the cliff of austerity and cutbacks and anti-communism. The other section of the working class is being led off the cliff of neoliberalism and SJW, identity politics, and it's a mess. It's a mess. The only way out of this crisis is class struggle and anti-imperialism. The working people of the United States, black, white, Asian, Arab, Latino, have to come to understand their problems weren't created. It's all right, Kurt. You can see it later. Their problems weren't created by immigrants from Mexico. Their problems weren't created by African Americans or a lack of a police state. Their problems weren't created by Muslims. Their problems weren't even created by racist white dudes from Kentucky. Weren't created by gun collectors in the National Rifle Association. The problems of U.S. society are rooted in the fact that we have an economy organized to make profits for a small group of owners. That we have an economy organized to serve the profits of a small owning class, not to serve the people. And that part of the way this economy has functioned is by setting up a global system called imperialism. And yes, at one point, that system called imperialism was causing the standard of living of American workers to rise. Absolutely. At one point, it was creating a broad middle class and suburbs and white picket fences. At one point, it was doing that. But that is over. In this global high-tech economy, where they've got, 3D printers and, Amazon Create Space, one button, you push a button, print on demand, and a book comes out. In this global economy where a single laptop can be made in 15 different countries, they do not need a prosperous industrial middle class. And when Lenin, in his essay, Imperialism and the Split in Socialism, said the social chauvinists are only defending the temporary privileges of some sections of the working class, this is what he was talking about. The 1950s, the 1960s, even the prosperous years and those who lived in prosperity in the 80s and 90s, those privileges that they experienced were temporary. They were the temporary privileges of some sections of the working class. And they are proving to be more and more and more temporary every day. Go to a neighborhood in Michigan. Go to a neighborhood in Pennsylvania and Ohio. Go to communities where they're drinking lead in their water. Go to communities where children are dying of opioids. Go to communities where people, everyone has a relative now who's in jail. And you tell me those people are just living it up. They are comfortable, spoiled labor aristocrats. Sure, they might have it better than workers in India do. But they are starting to learn that the privileges that they enjoyed and the privileges that they in some cases fought to defend, those privileges were temporary privileges. And the social chauvinism that they espoused, America's the greatest country in the world. If you don't like capitalism, why don't you move to another country? Those privileges that they were defending with their social chauvinist words were temporary privileges. And now because of technology, and now because of the fall of the Soviet Union, those privileges, those temporary privileges, are being taken away and rolled back. Best examples of CIA color revolutions. Social chauvinism is about defending the temporary privileges of some sections of the working class. That is true. That is absolutely the truth. Caitlin Johnson. That is absolutely the truth. But those privileges are being revoked. Conditions have changed. And if the moment is not seized, and if genuine class struggle anti-imperialists do not mobilize the American workers against the emerging low-wage police state, somebody else will. Somebody else will. But we are in a moment at this time that is full of great potential. It's full of great potential right now. Huge potential. And to let this moment slip away because you're demoralized, because you're feeling alienated, because you're feeling angry, because you feel like you don't fit in with this society, would be one of the greatest historical crimes and historical tragedies I've ever seen. To not unlearn what the boomer communists learned in the 1980s, to not take up history's challenge at a moment full of so much potential, the moment where polls show the American workers are more critical of capitalism than ever before. Polls show that the American workers are more anti-war than they've ever been before. To not take up history's challenge would be a great mistake. But now my third worldists sitting on the anxious bench, I want to speak to you directly. I've laid out the history of labor aristocracy and how it's hurt the working class movement in the United States and why we're entering a new period where we have far more potential than ever before. I've laid all of that out. But now I'm speaking to you directly. I want to talk to you on a personal level, not a macro level, not an economic level. I want to speak to you. Your third worldism, your belief that it can't be done, your demoralization, your belief that the American working class are all just a bunch of bought-off labor aristocrats, Euro settlers, they have no potential. It's rooted in frustration. You are frustrated with the conditions of average people. You look at average people and you hear their pro-imperialist sentiments. You hear their backward ideas. You hear their anti-communism. And in some cases, you hear their apathy and indifference. And it makes you angry. And it makes you frustrated. And you're an intelligent person. To be somebody who on your own, there's no mass communist movement right now. There's no communist knocking on your door. There's no one in your neighborhood, urging you to adopt communist ideas. There's no communists at your school. There's no communists on TV. The fact that you, on your own, discovered what imperialism is, the fact that you, on your own, learned the truth about socialism, and you learned that it hasn't failed everywhere it's ever been tried. You've learned that the lies we're told about how capitalism is a great system are false. You've learned how these wars are not waged for justice. They're waged for the profits of a few. You've learned all of that on your own. And that tells me something about you. It tells me that you are a highly intelligent person. It tells me that you're smarter than your peers. It tells me that you're more tuned in to the realities of the world events and of the economy. You're more tuned in than other folks are. And that's a good sign. It means that you're something special. At Vladimir Lenin's funeral, Stalin gave a memorial speech for Vladimir Lenin. And in that speech, he said, not everyone can be communists. We communists are cut from a special mold. That's what he said. We communists are cut from a special mold. It sounds to me like you are cut from a special mold. No one recruited you to communism. No one shook you awake. It's not like the movie. If you ever see the classic movie They Live, no one put the glasses on. No. You discovered, you saw through the lies on your own. That means you're a highly intelligent person. It's not easy to be a highly intelligent person, especially in a society that encourages stupidity. I mean, we very much have a society that cultivates and encourages stupidity. We do. We have a society that rewards people for being stupid, rewards people for not knowing anything, rewards conformity, rewards shallowness. We have a society in which smart people often suffer. I'll tell a story. I'll tell a personal story at risk of embarrassing myself. When I was a freshman in high school, I got a C in French class. Did you know that? I got a C in French class. When I could speak French better, I mean, it was still, I don't speak much French now, but I could speak French better than almost everyone in my class that got an A. And do you know why? You know why they got an A and I got a B or I got a C? Because 50% of our grade was not based on how we did on the vocabulary tests, not based on how we did on the spoken tests, not even based on our grades on our homework. It was based on this folder that we have to keep. This folder, it was, this folder we had, in which we had to have all of our papers perfectly organized. And I am not the neatest guy, and I lose papers a lot. And I often leave things here and there. And because of that, because I couldn't keep my papers in order, and I couldn't, even though I could speak French and did very well on all the tests, I got a C in French because I couldn't organize my papers the right way, like a normie. Right? Because I wasn't a good little normie who could put all my papers in perfect order. Didn't matter that I was learning the material better than other people could, because the education system is not set up to reward people who actually can learn or are intelligent. It's set to reward conformity. And I didn't have my papers, and the papers that I did have were crinkled, and so I got a C in French, even though I could speak French better than some of the people who got A's. Because that's how our educational system is set up. And if you're a very intelligent person, if you're somebody who is understanding things and is having depth, if you're somebody who's capable in this society without a mass communist movement, and in a society without a revolutionary organization, without mass class consciousness, to see through all the lies, and on your own come to the conclusion that capitalism and imperialism are wrong, start reading Lenin, start reading Marx, if you're one of those people, it's very likely you had experiences similar to the one that I had. And it made you mad. It made you angry. It made you angry. It made you angry, and it made you frustrated with the other people, that they could be so good and conforming. They could be so obedient when you know the truth about how evil this country is in so many ways, about how this country was founded on genocide, founded on slavery, how it was bombing Iraq and bombing Afghanistan and bombing Libya and destroying countries. You knew the truth, but other people were so norming and so conforming and so neat. And so neat, and so obedient that they couldn't let themselves see it. And that fills you with rage. You're angry. You're angry. And in your anger, you want to feel righteous. You want to say, they're Euro settlers. You want to say, they're labor aristocrats. You want to say, they're evil people. I'm good. I saw the truth, but they're bad people. And that feeling that you have there is totally justified. Totally justified, but it's also toxic. It's absolutely toxic, that feeling that you have. That is the feeling that libertarian objectivists appeal to. Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, the Fountainhead, that's what they're appealing to. That's often the feeling that mass shooters have. It's the feeling that incels have. It's a toxic, deadly feeling. It's a toxic, deadly feeling. And if you want to feel better, not just to feel righteous, not to feel righteous in your anger, but to actually feel better, you have to get over that feeling. You have to get over that feeling. And third worldism is keeping you from the one thing that can help you get over that feeling the most. Because there is nothing more satisfying, nothing more rewarding, nothing more healing than becoming a revolutionary. But by being a third worldist, by saying it can never be done, I'm just going to play video games, I'm just going to sit on the internet, I'm just going to tweet out, third worldist, Maoist things, by sitting there and living this alienated life, you're depriving yourself of the opportunity to do something that is far more rewarding than that. You have the opportunity to join a revolutionary movement, to be in an organization of people who, like you, understand this, and like you, are organizing to try and fight against it, and like you, are willing to make sacrifices, and just like you, have often felt alienated from this society and like they don't belong, and just like you, have often been full of anger and feeling helpless, like they can't stop the evils of this society, and like you, just like you, they see the evils, and they're angry that other people can't put the glasses on, and you have the opportunity to break out of your isolation and find other people who have the same attitude and stand arm in arm with them and awaken other people and maneuver in ways that can mobilize the broad masses of people and can actually tear this system down. You have the opportunity. Right before you is the opportunity to break out of this isolation and rage that you've always been feeling, to connect yourself with other people, to get out of the low and reactionary and hopeless and rage-filled feelings, and to make real connections with other people. You have that opportunity, but you don't take it. You don't take it. And in fact, nothing makes you angrier than me telling you that you have this opportunity. You're seething right now with anger. How dare he? How dare he? You're just red in the face and you're angry that I'm saying this. And you know why? You know why? Because your anger is trying to protect you. This is how you know how to live. This is how you know how to live. You've lived your whole life feeling like the world is evil, feeling like all the other Americans are evil, hopeless, racist Euro settlers, feeling like there is no point in organizing. And this Maoist third worldism, this self-righteousness, this is your shield. This is your protection. This is how you can keep sane in this existence. And giving that up and joining a revolutionary movement is scary. You're going to have to leave your individualist mindset. You're going to have to leave your lonely, hopeless, isolated life. You're going to have to take the risk of getting to know other people. You are going to have to take the risk of joining an organization with people that you might not always agree with, people that you might fight with, people maybe you won't fit in with them. You're going to have to take some big risks. And that scares you. And so you're going to try your hardest to hold on to that anger. Just hold on to that third worldism. You're going to try your hardest. You're going to try your hardest, and you're seething with rage that I would challenge it. You know, I often make reference to the Diggers song, right? There was a revolutionary group in Britain in like in 1649. They were called the Diggers, the True Levelers. And in their song, there's a line. There's a line about the enemies of the Diggers. It says, "To arrest you they advise, such fury they demise. The devil in them lies and has blinded both their eyes. Stand up now." And I often think of that because, you know, years ago there was a roommate I had. There was somebody I lived with, one of the nicest people you've ever met, just a really kind person. But he clearly had an issue with substance abuse. He clearly had an issue with drinking and with using drugs. And he was the nicest person. But the second that you suggested that he might have an issue with drugs, whoo, he got angry. It was the only time in my life I've ever seen this person angry was when you suggested he might have an issue with drugs, he might have an issue with drinking. That just made him so angry. Why? Because that was all he had. He was an addict. And that was what he used to take care of himself. And you just couldn't take it away. And that's why the third worldists get so angry when you dare suggest that there is actually hope. Nothing makes the third worldists more angry than saying there is actually hope of building a revolutionary working class movement. We could actually win. We could make progress. It makes them seethe with rage. How dare you? Don't try to take away my rage. Don't try to take away my alienation. This is what I have. I'm isolated. I'm lonely. I'm not connected to other people, but I feel righteous. I feel important in my isolation. I've got communist ideology and this special interpretation that makes me feel better about myself. And they don't want to see it go away. Their rage is there to protect them. The third worldism is there to protect them. U.S. Civil War. The rage is there to protect them. But I'm here to tell you that you don't have to be afraid. There is a revolutionary potential right now. There is real potential right now for socialism to come to the United States. There's real potential. I want to tell you, you know, at one point in my life when I was attracted to Maoist third worldist ideas, I would look at the pictures of lynchings, right? The 1920s and 30s, 1800s, there were lynchings where these mobs of racist white workers would gather and they would extrajudicially execute a black person, hang him or her in some cases. And not only that, they would light the body on fire and they would pose for pictures next to the dangling corpses and make postcards of themselves next to the corpses of a dead black person. It was like a picnic atmosphere. They would celebrate mutilating this person's body. It was some of the most barbaric, evil behavior that you can imagine. It was horrendous behavior. It was savage, barbaric criminality mob cruelty. It's horrendous. And I would look at those pictures. I would look at those pictures and I would say, well, this shows that any people that could do this could never be revolutionary. The white workers of the United States, because they once did this, they don't do it anymore, but because they once did it, this shows that they could never be revolutionary. And I made this argument. I made this argument to an older communist. I said, look at the pictures of lynching. Look how horrible the lynching was that went on. That shows a level of racism and a level of evil. These people could never make a revolution. And you know what this worker, this older communist worker, said to me? He said, Caleb, go read about Russia. And I said, wait, what? And he said, go read about Russia. Go read about the pogroms in Russia. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, the Russian workers did this. Those mobs of right-wing Russian workers who were filled with anti-Semitism, who were filled with racism, they used to engage in pogroms, where they would go and burn entire Jewish villages, and they would kill Jewish people, and they would burn Jewish villages, and they committed this same kind of thing, burning the bodies on fire, killing men, women, and children. Mobs of Russian workers used to go and engage in the same kind of behavior. Pogroms, read about it. The Russian working class, before the Russian Revolution, was racist, and was hateful, and was bigoted. They even had their own Ku Klux Klan. It was called the Black Hundreds Party. And they engaged in pogroms and all kinds of horrendous things. But what happened? Conditions changed. Conditions changed. And you know what? I can guarantee you, I can absolutely guarantee you that there was at least one Russian worker, probably many Russian workers, who at one point had been part of a pogrom, had been part of an anti-Semitic pogrom, who marched and took Berlin and defeated the Nazis. Did you know that? I can guarantee you that there must have been at least one or two or maybe even millions of Russian workers who were old enough to have been part of those anti-Semitic pogroms, those lynchings, who ended up in the Red Army liberating Berlin and tearing down the walls of Auschwitz concentration camp. People change. Situations change. That very Russian working class that was committing those horrendous pogroms was the very Russian working class that built the Soviet Union, defeated the Nazis, invented space travel, spread revolutionary Marxism all over the world. So if the Russian working class can go from pogroms and hate crimes to socialism and national liberation and anti-fascism, why couldn't the U.S. working class do it? Why not? Why not? Why not? Why not? People change. Conditions change. Situations change. Grandparents in Arkansas. Cross. Conditions change. People change. And I want to just say this. Part of the confusion that I hear from third worldists is they will say things like, oh, if you hand a gun to an average person in the United States, if you hand a gun to the average person in the United States and go say, kill the bourgeoisie, they won't do it. Well, first of all, if you hand a gun to anybody, anywhere in the world, and say, go and kill someone else, most people would say, no, I'd prefer not to do that. Thank you. People don't want violence. People don't want violence in their communities. People don't want violence in their neighborhood. People don't want violence in their schools. People don't want violence in their workplaces. So this idea, this weird belief that in the third world, all you have to do is hand someone a gun and they go and carry out a revolution, and in the first world they don't, it's not understanding what a revolution is, number one. And on top of that, it's not understanding that it's not like that anywhere in the world. Working people don't want violence. They want peace. They want stability. They want economic opportunity. That's what they want. And they want that everywhere. And in the developing world, there are right-wing anti-communist organizations. And there are large communist groups as well. Depends where you go, depends what country, depends what region, etc. And in the first world, as conditions change, as the labor aristocracy is being demolished, there is now more of an opportunity to build a mass working class movement. The opportunity is now there. We have the opportunity to go to the American people and say the reason you don't have jobs and health care, the reason the country is crumbling is because of this global capitalist system and imperialism. And that's the reason. We have the opportunity. But don't for a minute think that I'm telling you that it's going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. It is definitely not going to be easy. If I were to tell you that it's going to be easy, it's going to be easy to win the broad masses of Americans to socialism, I would be lying to you. It's going to be difficult. There are going to be people who fight their hardest not to hear it. There are going to be people who just insist that we're wrong. There are going to be times that we're going to fear for our lives. There are going to be times that we're going to be framed up and put in jail. There are going to be times that our comrades are murdered by reactionaries. There are going to be times when we can't get jobs. There are going to be times when it's going to be difficult. It is not going to be easy to win the broad masses of Americans to understand their historic duty to overturn capitalism and imperialism. It's not going to be easy. It is definitely not going to be easy. There's going to be sacrifices that are going to be made. There's going to be hardship. There's going to be family members who tell you they don't want to see you anymore because you're a dirty, rotten commie. There's going to be friends who you used to love and were your friends that are going to say to you, oh, well, you're one of those Reds. You're one of those extremists now. I can't associate with you. There could be even worse things. There's going to be hardship. There's going to be hardship. Don't doubt it for a minute. Don't doubt for a minute there's going to be hardship. There's going to be difficulties. But there's also going to be a beautiful, rewarding experience of having comrades, of being part of a group, of being able to depend on other people, of having something to believe in and something to struggle for, of being part of a community of people committed to overturning a system based on greed and injustice. There's going to be a great experience that you can't compare to anything else. Folks, I hope I don't start crying when I tell this story. Sometimes I do, but I will try to control myself. I remember when I was at the World Festival of Youth and Students in Quito, Ecuador in 2013. And I will never forget this moment because they had all of us who were there in Quito, at the Quito airport for the World Youth Festival, this gathering of communist young people. They had us all in one section of the airport. And so we're sitting in this section of the airport waiting for the buses to take us to the Bicentennial Park where the Communist Youth Festival was happening. We're sitting in the airport, and it's very exciting because, you know, we're there, we're American communists. There's communists from Africa and communists from Asia and communists from Vietnam and different places. And at one point, word went through the airport as we're all sitting there in our different communist groups' T-shirts and, you know, having conversations with people in broken languages and stuff, you know, trying to find somebody who speaks English and trading newspapers and trading buttons with communists from Greece and communists from Angola and communists from South Africa and communists from Vietnam and Bangladesh. You know, we're just socializing. It's very exciting to be in a room full of communists from so many different countries. We're in this section of the airport. But then all of a sudden a hush came over the room. A hush came over the room. I'll never forget this because the plane from North Korea had just landed. And everyone got silent in the room. Everyone got silent in the room because the plane from North Korea had just landed. And then the doors opened, and the North Korean youth, the leaders of the Kim Il-sung Communist Youth League, walked in. And the men from North Korea were wearing suits and ties, and the women from North Korea were wearing traditional Korean gowns, and they walked into the airport in perfect formation. And the room was just silent. It was completely silent. Because we're all just watching the North Koreans walk in. And then, after a few moments of just silence, as we're watching this stream of North Korean communist young people walk into this airport, someone started applauding. Pretty soon, that whole airport was cheering for the North Koreans. And the whole room was applauding for the people of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And it was an utterly amazing experience. An utterly amazing experience. And at that moment, I knew I was tied to something that was so much bigger than myself. I was not in Kansas anymore. I was part of a global revolutionary movement. I was part of something so much bigger than my own fears and my own worries. These were people who millions of them had been bombed and destroyed by the United States. And they had been holding out amid sanctions and so much suffering. And I was in a room full of people, a room full of young communists applauding for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And it was an amazing experience. It's something that I will never forget. And, you know, at that youth festival in 2013, you know, meeting after meeting happened. I met with communists from different countries and different political parties. They all said the same thing to me. What's wrong with American communists? What's wrong with American communists? Why don't you guys wear suits? Why don't you guys wear suits? Why don't you guys take politics seriously? Why aren't you building a base among the population? When the living standard is dropping, why aren't you building a mass base among the population of the United States? Why are you not taking this opportunity to build a revolutionary movement? And they talked to us. Why do you focus on cultural issues? You know, why are you not fighting for jobs? You know, the Cubans had a conversation with. And, you know, we met with the North Koreans. And, you know, something really hilarious about North Koreans. So in Korea, Korean culture, you don't hug people. Hugging doesn't happen. Public affection. You know, men don't hug other men. Women don't hug other women. Men and women especially don't hug. It's just, they don't do that, right? You don't do that. But we were in Ecuador, in South America. And in South America, they're always hugging. You know what I mean? South American people, they're hugging. You know, the man is kissing the woman on the cheek. You know, I mean, it's a very affectionate culture, right? It's a very affectionate culture. So the North Koreans, their culture is they don't hug. People in Latin America, they love to hug. They love to kiss. They can't keep their hands off you practically. So these North Koreans had clearly been trained before they got to the festival to try and fit in Ecuador. And so every time you talked to a North Korean, they immediately put their arms around you. It was like the first thing they could do is like, oh, I've been trained that we hug people here. And so they would like hug you, like in this robotic way. It was hilarious. I was hugged by North Koreans. I was hugged by North Koreans. You know? Sorry, do you know how many Koreans the United States has killed? I think 4 million, 5 million. And then there was the arduous march in the 90s where they cut off their oil supply. And, There was food shortages because the United States was trying to barricade them after the fall of the Soviet Union. But they hugged us. They hugged us, Americans. Even though they don't hug in Korean culture, they hugged us. And they told us that our job as communists in the United States of America is so important. The job that we are doing here at the center of the empire is so important. They didn't tell us it's hopeless in the United States. Your people have no hope. That's not what they said to us. The Koreans didn't say that. The Vietnamese didn't say that. The Venezuelans didn't say that. The Cubans didn't say that. The Bangladeshis didn't say that. None of them said, oh, it's hopeless in your country. No, they said you have a responsibility in your country. And we're frustrated because we watch what you American communists do. We watch what you American communists do, and you're doing a shitty job. And we're always getting attacked and bombed and facing an onslaught from the imperialists. And you American communists need to get your act together. The third world communists didn't say, oh, there's no hope for you. You're privileged, first worldist. There's no hope for you. That is not what they said to us. They said, get your shit together. They said, get your shit together. They said, get your shit together and do it right. Get those low-income Americans who are losing their jobs to understand that we're not their enemies. Wall Street and the Pentagon are their enemies. They said, get your shit together. Take your job seriously. They didn't play this game. The people in the third world, the third world communists, are not third worldists. And if third world communists are not third worldists, I sure as hell ain't going to be one. I'll tell you that much. If third world communists are telling me that I have a responsibility in the center of the empire to get Americans to understand that their real enemy is imperialism and to build a broad working class movement among the people of the United States and to get them to understand that they can be communists as Americans, that being patriotic and loving your country doesn't mean loving imperialism, doesn't mean loving war and racism, that being patriotic and loving your country means standing in solidarity with the people of the world and dismantling imperialism. That is my responsibility. That is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do that. And I am in complete dereliction of duty if I don't do that. It is our responsibility here in the center of the empire to get the people living at the center of the empire to understand who their real enemies are, number one. And it is our responsibility to not let this moment slip away. We are entering a prolonged capitalist crisis right now. The capitalist system is in a prolonged crisis. Living standards are dropping. Wages are falling. Conditions are getting worse, and the American workers are ready to fight back. They are against these wars. They are against the lies. They are against the low-wage police state. They are ready to resist. And if we don't go to them, somebody else will. And somebody else is. One of these synthetic left pieces of garbage, one of these libertarian liars is talking to the American workers right now. And you want to tell me that you're not going to do it because, oh, it's too hard, they're all Euro settlers, I just want to play video games. Are you serious? Is that what you're telling me? You are going to give up the greatest opportunity. Eugene Debs, Huey Newton, William Z. Foster, Gus Hall would all kill to be in our shoes right now. They would kill to be in our shoes right now because there wasn't a revolution in the 1930s. There wasn't a revolution in the 1960s. But if we play our cards right, if we get our shit together, if we stop advocating violence and put forward a coherent program, if we seize this moment, if we teach the broad masses real Marxism, there very well could be a revolution in our time. It could very easily happen. Our society is disintegrating and destabilizing very, very quickly. Everything is lining up, and the low-wage police state is being resisted, and the capitalist class is fracturing and fighting among itself. This is exactly the situation that Vladimir Lenin talked about when he said only when society is incapable of functioning in the old way, only when even among the ruling class there is questions about, the old way. This is the moment that they were talking about. It's happening now. We are entering the crisis. This is the moment. This is the moment when it could actually happen. And if we let this slip away because it's too hard, oh, it's too hard, we are doing a huge disservice, right? We are doing a huge disservice. Doing a huge disservice to humanity. I take what I do very, very seriously. Folks, real anti-imperialism is not tweeting F the USA on Twitter. Real anti-imperialism is not, spelling America with 3 Ks. Real anti-imperialism is standing in solidarity with black nationalists, standing in solidarity with Iran, standing in solidarity with Venezuela, standing in solidarity with Cuba and Nicaragua and China and Russia. Real anti-imperialism is building a broad working class movement. A broad working class movement that could actually win, that doesn't tell the American workers to go screw themselves, but says the hope for you to have a better life is in dismantling this system. That's real anti-imperialism. Performative tweeting and tantruming and talking about how revolutionary you are, alienating the American people to show how revolutionary you are, that's not it. That's not what real anti-imperialism looks like. Real anti-imperialism is not performative words. It's serious, effective actions. And we are in a moment where it could actually happen. We could mobilize a movement here in the heart of the empire for the banks, factories, and industries to be reorganized to serve public good, not the profits of a few. We could dismantle the huge multinational corporations that dominate the world. We could restructure the United States on new values of solidarity and brotherhood. We could do it. But in order to do that, we have to take our job seriously. We have to take our job seriously. No more silliness. No more screwing around. You got to take this tough pill that says now is the time to find the Center for Political Innovation and join our efforts. Become a John Brown volunteer. Get involved in the CPI's mass education efforts. Out of the movement to the masses. You got to do it. You got to do it. You got to do it. Seize this moment. So there you go, folks. Those are my opening remarks. Those are my opening remarks, as wild and emotional as they were. But I did promise you all that before we did a roll call, I would sing a short song in honor of Mr. Jason Unruhe. But before I do that, I have to write the super chat down. How do you think a coworker is a Trumper is still acting? Okay. I talk to a coworker. Still as if Trump is president. All right. Oh, and there's another super chat that just went by. Oh boy, wow. Justin Simons, absolutely brilliant. This is the moment. We have a moral and historical material responsibility to fight imperialism. Anti-imperialism is the primary goal of the American socialist movement. Thank you, Justin, and you are correct about that, sir. You are correct. Anti-imperialism is socialism. You are not a socialist in the center of imperialism if you are not an anti-imperialist, because the capitalism of the United States is imperialism. Absolutely. So now, for a little fun break, the song, I'm trying to remember exactly, right? What is it? All right. I want to get it right because I don't want to. God. Okay. What's wrong? Right. Okay. What is it? Okay. I'm going to write the lyrics down to make sure I have them right because if I get it wrong, that'll be painful to listen to. All right. Thank you for being patient, everyone. Good times. You know what? I think we're going to do it later. I think we'll do it a little bit later in the broadcast, actually. Thank you for your patience, folks. I think we'll do it a little bit later in the broadcast. So why don't we do the roll call? Why don't we do the roll call? I think that'll be best. We'll do the roll call for now, and I'll start answering super chats. And at some point, I will break into song, but not now. All right, but I do have the lyrics. Thank goodness. I had to get those lyrics exactly right because it would have been painful if I'd been stuttering through them. All right, roll call. Who's with us? Who's with us? Who's with us tonight? Who's with us tonight? Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, Chaya, Tulare in California, OP from Florida, Greg in Hong Kong, China, Finn in Duluth, Minnesota, Fred in Alameda, California. It's Connie, very exciting chat room growing. Welcome, Connie. Dario from Brooklyn, shout out to you. Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn. Arturo from Alaska, David in China, Richmond in Tacoma, Zach B in Richmond, Cleveland Pirate Alex, Wisconsin, Temple City, Nassau County, Char Char Darling, Joe Gale, also in Nassau County. Shout out to both of my Nassau friends, right? Just a quick thing, right? I can't get over this, right? So New York City, right, is like the most, elite, wealthy, cosmopolitan area. But as soon as you get into Long Island, right, all the names, it sounds like the most hillbilly place ever, right? You got Nassau County and Hicksville and Syosset, and it just makes me laugh. The names of places in Long Island are very funny. And actually, Long Island is not hillbillies. I mean, it's quite a wealthy area, right? Long Island, you've got, what is it, East Egg, and that's like the Great Gatsby and all that. I just think it's funny. You're outside of New York City. When people used to say Hicksville, I used to think that was just a town. I thought, Hick is kind of a slur for a rural working class person. I used to think that Hicksville wasn't a name. I thought if you're from a Hicksville, you must be. No, Hicksville is an actual place in Nassau County. Or no, it's not in Nassau County. It's somewhere in Long Island, whatever. Anyway, next question. Sam in Washington State, Northfield, Minnesota, JT24 in Mississippi, Enoch in Australia, Southern Illinois, San Jose from Texas, Mo in Toronto, John in Houston, Johnny from Pennsylvania, Connie Reed is present, and she's in Canada. Ha! St. David's, Bermuda, Clydebank, Springfield, Missouri, Zombie Christian from northern New Jersey, Kendall in San Diego, Tony from Tasmania, Berlin, Deutschland, UP is great, Paris of the Plains, KCMO, Detroit, Michigan, very, very good, Marlin in San Diego, John McCarthy in Illinois near Chicago, Auckland, New Zealand, Cole from Calgary, Vinicius from Brazil, Dan Keating out in New Jersey, David from Hamilton, Ontario, Maine, USA, Southern USA, Red Sox Nation, Tam from Scotland, Southern Michigan, or Northern Michigan, Consulting, Marxist from San Antonio, Texas, Leo and Mimi from Mexico, Memo in Ukiah, California, Kent in Edmonton, Bobby and Mel in Austin, Mexico City, Ryan in St. George, Utah, shout out to you, Oklahoma, China, Shanghai, Adam Zhao, Grand Junction, Colorado, Calgary, Canada, Mosin from Iran, and Matutuck. Yeah, that's also, there you go, Joe. That's very good. Matutuck, right? Bushwick, Brooklyn, Co. Right? I'm afraid the roll call because I won't be a mod. Afraid to do the roll calls because I don't ever want to be a mod. All right, if you don't want it, I mean, I could do it, but there you go. Hang out in Hicksville a lot. Hawaii opening, Sam in Chicago, Minnesota, the Hamptons, Red Sox Nation, Ian from Scotland, Baltimore, East Meadow, East Ghetto, British Columbia, Canada, Melbourne, Australia, Deha. Thank you for the correction. It's pronounced Deha. Very good. Deha, right? Julian in Sussex County, UK. Good stuff. 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 Rock and roll McDonald's. Mike in Rhode Island. Excellent. All righty, folks. All righty. All right. So now we have a number of super chats to get through. What are my religious beliefs? I am a Protestant Christian, and I am not an evangelical. Protestant Christians generally divide into two major categories, right? When you have Christians, you have Eastern Orthodox Christians, you have Roman Catholic Christians, then you have Protestants. I am a Protestant. And among Protestants, you have evangelical or fundamentalist Protestants, and you have liberal or mainline Protestants. And I am a mainline Protestant. I grew up in the United Church of Christ. At this point, I do not accept their teachings on everything. My beliefs are pretty much Protestant Christianity, but at this point, I am not a member of any church, but I do hold, religious beliefs. My wife is Roman Catholic. When her mother is in town, I attend Catholic Mass with her, but I am a Protestant Christian. I do not recognize the Vatican, but I also am not a biblical literalist, and I believe in baptizing infants. I don't think that you have to be baptized when you're, a teenager, and, I don't think the Bible is literally 100% true. I believe in, Darwinian evolution, and, there's obviously many things in the Bible that are not literally true, so I am what you call a liberal Protestant. I am a liberal Protestant. That's how I would categorize myself. I am from, the tradition I grew up with was the United Church of Christ congregational tradition, right? The Congregationalist Church, which it's the Puritans, actually. That's what I grew up with, UCC, which was also, interestingly enough, that was the church that Reverend Jeremiah Wright, Obama's pastor, was in. Obviously, the church that I went to in my little town in Ohio was nothing like that. We didn't have, our pastor didn't go, "God damn America." No, didn't happen. It wasn't like that at all. But there you go. There you go. The church I grew up in Ohio was actually quite conservative, but for the town, it was liberal. That's a whole nother story, and there might be somebody from there watching, and they might not approve of anything I say, and I don't represent them, but whatever. Next question. All righty. Wuhan lab. What do I think of the Wuhan lab leak? Look, I'll say what I've always said, which is the origin of diseases is often much more complicated and bizarre and strange than anyone recognizes. Where did AIDS come from? Do you know where AIDS came from? Because for a long time they said AIDS came from people having sex with monkeys, and then AIDS came from people eating monkeys, and then AIDS came, okay, you don't drink, you're right, okay. Don't drink and drugs, right? Don't drink. Views on drugs. All right. Alrighty. Here's another wild thing. I was taught in school. Do you have any special appreciation for the IRA as an Irish American? I was taught in school that syphilis came from Native Americans. Right? I was taught that. That's not true. That syphilis came when Christopher Columbus, 1492, he sailed the ocean blue. Some of his soldiers had a little too much fun with Native American women or I guess raped them, and that's not funny at all. But, and then they came back, and that's where syphilis came from. That didn't happen, right? That's bullshit. That story is made up. For years, it was considered a historical fact that Native Americans gave syphilis to Christopher Columbus and to the Spaniards, and that's where it came from. That's a bullshit story. That's a bullshit story. Didn't happen. Did not happen. Syphilis was in Europe long before Christopher Columbus. Didn't happen. But people believed it to be true until they did some more biological research, and then they discovered that that never happened. That never happened. So there you go. Never happened. Never happened. Well, where did AIDS come from? Right? There's competing stories about it. People aren't even sure where AIDS comes from. There's actually big disagreements among scientists about about AIDS and all of that. So the idea that the pandemic, it leaked from a lab, or it didn't leak from a lab, or it came from a wet market, or it didn't even start in China. We don't know. I'm not a biologist. I am not a biologist. I am not qualified to tell you where it came from, right? Look, I mean, we know that, Lyme disease, if I'm not mistaken, was originally in a lab, right? Lyme disease was created from a lab, if I'm not mistaken, the origin that they now think. But then who knows? They could do more research and discover that that's not true. I'm not a biologist. I am not here to tell you where it came from. But I am here to tell you that hating China, especially because their economy is soaring ahead, because they handled the pandemic way better than we did, even though they had it before anybody else. They were the first place that it was massively spread, and they were aware of it. The fact that they had it and they dealt with it, and their economy is soaring ahead, and the rest of the world is trying to catch up, if anything, we should be looking up to China and trying to learn from how they successfully dealt with the pandemic. But instead, what we're doing is we're trying to blame them for it somehow. Is it possible that it came from a lab? I don't know. Is it possible it came from a wet market? I don't know. Is it possible it came from the United States because of the military games that were happening there? I don't know. I am not a biologist, and I don't know. But what I do know is that demonizing China is not good for the United States, and that playing up the idea that China is our enemy is not good for the United States. And I also know that biological warfare is a very bad thing. Right? Do you remember the anthrax scare right after 9/11, right? You may not be old enough, but back in my day, kids, there was this thing called 9/11. It was a terrorist attack. Anyway, but after 9/11, there was the anthrax scare. Do you remember this? And all these people were getting anthrax in the mail and all of this. Well, one thing anthrax as a biological weapon was invented by the U.S. government. The U.S. government was trying to figure out biological weapons. They invented anthrax, and look what happened because of that, right? And that, biological warfare, there's a reason it's been banned by the Geneva Convention. Germ warfare, chemical warfare, biological warfare, not good. Not good. And if anything, this pandemic should be a moment where we as a society come together and all the countries of the world agree to universally disarm when it comes to chemical weapons. Chemical weapons, biological weapons, germ warfare, get rid of it. Get rid of it. H.G. Wells was a very famous writer in Britain. He wrote a short story called The Stolen Bacillus, warning about the dangers of biological warfare. Biological warfare is a nightmare. And the reason that everyone's talking about this lab leak theory and all this is because deep down, all kinds of governments do it. All kinds of governments do it. Biological weapons, there's all kinds of governments all over the world that have labs full of biological weapons. And maybe COVID wasn't from a leak. We don't know. I don't know. I don't pretend to know. But what I do know is that a leak that causes a pandemic is something that could happen when you have labs full of people developing deadly germs that they can use and unleash on another country in a war. And the reason you're doing it is because you know that the other country has it, and it's like an arms race for deadly germs that can be used in a war. There's the potential that maybe this time the pandemic wasn't caused by, a lab leak, but another one could be, right? And this is the time that as the human race, we just got to come together and say, no more development of biological weapons. No more development of biological warfare. It shouldn't happen, right? And if this isn't a moment to say that, just like this should be a moment to say Medicare for all. Hello, the capitalists are very good at not pointing out what's really there, right? They don't want you to see the forest for the trees, Right now, we don't need a new war with China. We need Medicare for all, and we need to abolish germ warfare. Next question. Um, uh, um, James Connolly talking about how the British liberals bankrolled an Irish independence movement that didn't change things. Yes, James Connolly, I believe the quote that's attributed to him is he said, "An English boss is a monster, but an Irish one is worse." He argued that the only way Ireland could really achieve full national liberation was with establishing socialism, right? And that James Connolly, as far as he was concerned, the workers' movement and the Irish independence movement were tied together. And also that James Connolly agreed with Lenin. Lenin said that countries could fight for their national liberation as nations, right? And that James Connolly combined socialism with the struggle for national liberation. James Connolly lived in the United States for a while and was with the Wobblies at one point, but he disagreed with them because they said that there was no nationalism, right? You know, the worker has no nation, workers of the world unite. And he said, no, the Irish people will fight for socialism on the basis of their national liberation. So James Connolly is definitely someone worth studying. So there you go. Third worldists are hard determinists. Yes, they are. They kind of overlook the fact that the world is constantly changing and that things that might be true at one time are not always true. And it's, again, they turn a fact, a reality that we have to face into a law. And that is a mistake, and that is a big mistake. And it's a big mistake, and that's why I wanted to give that opening message. Capitalism and social Darwinism. Well, social Darwinism was basically it was the using of Charles Darwin's biological theories to justify free market capitalism. It was a political, argument, basically, an argument in favor of Adam Smith free trade economics based on Darwinian evolution, using phrases like survival of the fittest, to justify free market policies. Now, one of the problems with that, first of all, is that survival of the fittest, first of all, is not a word that Darwin ever used. That was used by people interpreting his theories. It's not a phrase, he didn't actually use that phrase. That's just a phrase, that's an interpretation. And in Darwinism, fitness doesn't mean strongest. It doesn't mean smartest. It can mean all kinds of things, right? Based on the conditions, right? That Darwin's theory of natural selection is based on the idea that there are these random mutations that cause people to have an advantage they don't even know about. So fittest doesn't mean you're the smart. It doesn't mean the smartest survive, the strong. That's not what it means. Social Darwinism kind of misinterprets the meaning of that. On top of that, even Charles Darwin himself, right? Many biologists, and I personally do believe in historical progress, but Charles Darwin also did, but his biological theories don't show that. Charles Darwin argues, especially in his writing on the descent of man, he writes about the human being as the pinnacle of evolution, like all of biological evolution was all leading to this ultimate place of mankind, the human. Well, that's bullshit. Any biologist will tell you, no, there's no trajectory in evolution. It's just natural selection. It's just what happens to be where, and that's it, right? If you were trying to impose like a narrative onto evolution, and first there were first there were sea creatures, and then it's not a creation story. It's random mutations leading to this, leading to that, not leading any place. There's no direction, right? That's why it's natural selection. But Darwin, the way he writes about it, he gives it this viewpoint, and that was like kind of the British Empire viewpoint. He was a racist and an advocate of British imperialism. And he argued, what the British believed, that they were the most advanced, right? That they were the most far along. They were the most advanced empire. And that, he projected British empire ideology into his writing. Now, that doesn't mean he was wrong. I mean, I think there is obviously evolution. Species do change over time. And I'm not opposed to Darwinian evolution. I'm certainly not a biblical creationist by any means. I do think that evolution is scientific, fact as far as we are concerned. I mean, it's the most, it's like science. It's always in question. It's always up for debate, and so it could be refuted. Something else could come along, and there's alternative theories of evolution. There's Lamarckian evolution, for example, and and I don't even ask me about Lysenko. I don't know anything about that, and I'll embarrass myself. And really, I respect people. There's a lot of communists, right? If you go around the world, there are a lot of communists who disagree with prevailing scientific viewpoints, right? I mean, there's the whole Lysenko thing. I don't know anything about that. Don't ask me about that. Haas likes to talk about that. Listen to Haas. He might be right. He might be wrong. I don't know anything about it. There's communist physics, right? Mike Gimbel has written a book called Dialectical Materialism versus the New Physics. Dr. Eric Lerner has written a book called The Big Bang Never Happened. Both of them are communists. And as far as they are concerned, the new physics of Einstein is malarkey, and it's an attempt to refute dialectical materialism by the bourgeoisie. Wow, I mean, there you go. I have no way of arguing that. I don't know anything about physics. There are some communists around the world who question aspects of the AIDS narrative and argue things about AIDS that I don't even understand what they're arguing. So don't ask me about this kind of stuff because I don't know. But yeah, I don't know. But there are various communists who question very prevailing opinions in the scientific world. So there you go. But yeah, social Darwinism is an argument that a lot of capitalists use. And even today, you'll get a lot of libertarian types who will say, I'm just the fittest. I think there's a right wing, there's like a white supremacist guy on YouTube who's basically a social Darwinist. Edward Dutton, I think. He's like a social Darwinist. He's this British guy who gets on there and talks about, Darwinian conditions and all that. Yeah, he's like a social Darwinist, racist British Empire guy, and yeah, I mean, it's social Darwinism is an argument that advocates of capitalism believe in, and it's heavily tied in with quote unquote scientific racism. It's a pseudo-scientific racism, and eugenics and all of that. It's awful. It's very, very awful, and I think we should chuck it into the garbage. Social Darwinism is an example of capitalist propaganda. But the big new atheist, what's his name? The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins. He wrote a book called The Selfish Gene, and it's all about how capitalism is in our genetics. That's social Darwinism. That's social Darwinism, my friend. Yeah, I mean, and that's why the new atheist movement is very problematic in a lot of ways. I'm Richard Dawkins. My next book will be called The 112 Greatest Mistakes of Everyone Else, and Why I Am the Smartest Human Being Who Ever Existed. Anyway, my ideological journey. Well, if you really want to hear the whole story, go and watch a video I made called My Journey Toward Understanding Imperialism. I talk about it for 2 hours straight. You can listen to everything I said. Basically, I was getting interested in communism, read the Communist Manifesto when I was in 5th grade, didn't understand it, but was interested in these ideas. 9/11 happened. 9/11 forced me to learn about U.S. imperialism. Was first hanging around, was reading different communist books and researching stuff in high school, got politically active in college, was first in a Maoist group, like a Maoist ultra-leftist group, but they were not really putting forward a coherent line. I couldn't bring myself to really agree with them. So then I was in the Workers' World Party for 8 years, through my 4 years of college, and then, in New York City for a long time, I was in the Workers' World Party. And my career expanded, and they lost their minds over Donald Trump, and we went separate ways. And now I'm building the Center for Political Innovation, and I've written a number of books about Marxism. That's pretty much, that's where I'm at, yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of reading and studying, and, there you go. All right. The story of Spartacus. Well, Spartacus was a slave in Rome. He was not born a slave. He was from a Bedouin society. He was from Thrace, and I forget where Thrace is. There's a region called Thrace, and he was Thracian. And it's the region of Thrace, and he was a Bedouin, a Bedouin, and he was taken captive by the Romans and made a slave. And because he was a good fighter, he was a big, strong guy who knew how to fight. They made him a gladiator, but then he organized the other gladiators, and they broke free and they started a slave revolt, and it was a big deal. And And the Roman Republic crushed them, and then it crucified all of the all of the slave rebels. It crucified them in Italy. There's a big road leading back to Rome, and they crucified. There was a line of guys on crosses all the way back. They crucified all the slave rebels. And it was an incident, and it showed how slavery was very much it was the weakness of the Roman Empire, right? That it depended on slave labor, and it was the weakness of the Roman Empire, and it shook the Roman Republic. There's a movie, there was a novel called Spartacus that was written by Howard Fast, who was a Communist Party member, and he wrote this novel, a Marxist novel about Spartacus, and then Dalton Trumbo, who was a Communist Party member, wrote a screenplay about it. And I argue that Spartacus by Howard Fast, the novel, and the movie is really, it's not really about ancient Rome. It's an analogy for World War II and the Popular Front. The idea is that Spartacus's slave revolt, and they have Spartacus, he breaks free, and the slaves, they form like a socialist commune, and they're, and then it causes the Roman Republic to fall, and Marcus Crassus becomes like the dictator, and he's clearly supposed to look like Hitler at one point, and that's not what happened. The Roman Republic, stayed intact until the death of Julius Caesar. So, the Spartacus slave revolt was in 73 BC, and the Roman Republic didn't fall until 44 BC. So that didn't happen. Marcus Crassus never became the dictator. The Roman Republic didn't fall and become, a military state, and crush democracy because of Spartacus. That didn't happen. And on top of that, I don't know. It's very much an analogy for like the working class revolution in the Soviet Union causes fascism to arise. And towards the end of the movie or the book, Spartacus's son is able to be free or whatever, and because they enter an alliance kind of with the more democratic Romans who are resisting Marcus Crassus. It's an analogy for the Popular Front. It's the 1930s and, post-World War II Communist Party, which Howard Fast was a member of, which Dalton Trumbo was a member of. And they wrote, they wrote a movie about a slave revolt in ancient Rome, basically trying to explain World War II. Famous scene where they're going to, they want them to identify the leader of the slaves, Spartacus, and they all say, "I'm Spartacus, I'm Spartacus, no, I'm Spartacus." That's the famous scene or whatever. It's Kirk Douglas is the hero, and he has this look on his face. He's, tough guy, and yeah, it's something else. It's, early 1960s movie came out, and it was a big deal that Hollywood made the movie. The author of it was a communist, Dalton Trumbo, and John F. Kennedy, before he took office, it was in theaters around Christmas time, right after John F. Kennedy won the elections, and he went to see it, even though the John Birch Society and the Ku Klux Klan were protesting the movie and called it communist propaganda. John F. Kennedy, and he said, "It's a fine picture," and he went and saw the movie, and that was a big deal because it was Joe McCarthy. It was Joe McCarthy. It was saying no to McCarthyism and Hollywood blacklisting, but it was also sending a message to the Soviet Union. That was, I argue, the movie Spartacus, right? So it came out in like what, 1960, 1961, something like that, right? And that McCarthyism had been broken, Stalin had died, and Khrushchev had come into office, and the strategy of the Kennedy administration was that they wanted to negotiate with the Soviets and get the Soviets to call off third world revolutions. Any Chinese movies you recommend? All right. And so the USA was being friendly to Khrushchev. And the idea was if he could hold back with his, his notion of the three, with the notion of the three peacefuls, if he could hold back revolution in the developing world, the USA would be nicer. They'd have détente with the Soviet Union. So showing a movie written by a communist, in theaters, and having John F. Kennedy, the liberal president who just got elected, go to the movie and say, "It's a fine picture," and stand up to the McCarthys, that was a way of sending a message to the Soviet Union. And it was a message mainly to Soviet writers, Soviet artists, Soviet intellectuals. It's like, look, America is such a free and open society. There's a movie written by a communist in all the movie theaters. Now, do you have movies written by capitalists in your Soviet movie theaters? No, And right, and that was the beginning of what Brzezinski did. It was courting the intellectuals and the artists and the scientists in the USSR and cultivating them as assets that could be used to stage the color revolutions and bring down the Soviet Union. It was the beginning of that strategy, that soft power manipulation strategy of building up to the color revolution. And it was the very beginning, and it starting in the '60s, right? The intellectuals and the kind of the those kind of folks were being were being kind of manipulated by American intelligence, and right, and the fact that we had the movie Spartacus, we allowed this communist film to be shown in the United States. There you go. So there you go. But yeah, and the Kennedy administration was something special. They still believed in historical progress, and Kennedy, right before he was killed, he wanted to make the moon mission a joint mission with the Soviets. Can you believe that? So imagine that. But anyhow, I got to keep getting through these super chats because we've got miles to go before we sleep, to quote Robert Frost. All right. LA, the city is devastated. Chaya is in LA, and she said the city is devastated. Yes, Skid Row, homeless population. I mean, it's unbelievable. California is Southern California in particular, is such a wealthy place, but there's so many desperately poor people there. Unbelievable, unbelievable. And I heard, the folks at Convo Couch came out to our conference, gave an amazing talk about some of the community organizing that's going on with the homeless people there. And eventually they're going to fight for their rights. I mean, this is the beginning of something. All right. The capitalists create more value by finding the structure of production. No, because socialist societies have structures of production. I mean, look, in countries where they've abolished capitalism, the state sets up structures of production. This is what we're always told: is that the capitalists are jobs creators, right? You have to. If there was no capitalists, there'd be no jobs. Well, no, in countries where they've abolished capitalism, everyone has a job. They have universal employment. So that's just bullshit. That's just bullshit. Garcetti gets an ambassadorship. I don't know about that. Can't comment on it. All righty. All right. Best examples of CIA color revolutions. Well, probably the most clear example was the overthrow of the Eastern Bloc and the Soviet Union. But, you can talk about, I think in Ukraine, they had the Orange Revolution. What else? There was the green, or there was the Green Revolution in Iran. The CIA staged protests after the election of Ahmadinejad, the Green Revolution in Iran. And, I mean, the Tiananmen events in 1989 in China. And, yeah, they do this all over the world, right? In Venezuela, they had the La Salida SOS Venezuela campaign. This is what the CIA does, right? They stage these uprisings. That's how they work, The other day, it's very funny. The other day, so in New York City, especially now that we're starting to open up, there's people all over the city asking for money, right? And that happens, right? If you're out in public, someone walks up to you, hey, you have some money. Sometimes you might give a homeless person $1 or something. Most of the time you don't, but sometimes, you got a nickel or something, you might give it to them. Often if I have some leftover food, I'll give it to the homeless person, but whatever, but anyway, the other day I was talking with a few friends, in New York City, and I'm near the UN, and this woman walks over to my group of friends, and she says, hi, she says, I'm a human rights activist, and I need money for a hotel room tonight. I'm doing something at the UN. Can you give me some money? I said, no, thanks. I really can't help you out. It's very funny. I didn't say this. I was polite. But it's like the last person I would ever give my money to is a human rights activist, right? Look what the human rights activists did to Libya. Look what the human rights activists did to Syria. Look what the human rights activists are doing in Venezuela. The last person, I mean, if she wanted me to give her money, she was talking to the wrong guy. I'm not going to give money to a human rights activist near the UN. Give me a break. Give me a break. But it's kind of funny, right? She didn't know she was talking to Mr. Tanky. But that's okay. I just said no thanks. I'm a nice guy. I don't want to be rude to, maybe she was fighting for the rights of workers on the job or something. I don't know, but and maybe she didn't need money at all. Maybe this was just her scam. You get that a lot too. So whatever. Opinions. Mr. Smith goes to Washington. All right. Very good. Very, very good. There you go. Alrighty. Okay. Okay. Alrighty. Caitlin Johnston. Love her. Retweet her all the time. She's great. Anti-imperialist. trying to, link progressive people to anti-war stuff. They've done the same thing to her they've done to me. They demonize these folks, try to say that you're a white supremacist or something. She seems like a great person doing anti-imperialist work. I like the work that she does. U.S. Civil War, what was it really about? It was about the fact the USA had two economies. It had the industrial economy of the North and it had the slave economy of the South. And the USA was expanding westward, and the South wanted more slave states, and the North didn't. And the free soilers, the small farmers, didn't, and the labor movement didn't. But the South was determined to maintain slavery and to have slavery expand. And really what the Civil War was about, it wasn't even about, quote-unquote, states' rights to have slavery. It was about the fact that the southern states, they wanted the whole country to accommodate their slave system. They wanted the northern states to participate in the Fugitive Slave Act, and like if a slave broke free. I'm glad you like these streams, Zachariah. I'm really glad you like it. A slave broke free and ran away to Minnesota. They wanted Minnesota to be obligated to send him back to Mississippi. The other states are like, no, we're not going to participate in returning slaves to your state. And they said that you have to. Fugitive Slave Act. They wanted the new states that came into the country to all be slave states. And other people were like, no, why do we need more slave states? And so Abraham Lincoln got elected, not on a platform of ending slavery. He said he would not end slavery, but he said no more slave states, no more fugitive slave law. You can do your slavery thing in the South, but the rest of the country is going to not play ball with you anymore. And that was too much for the slaveholders. No. They wanted the whole federal government, they wanted the whole country to bend over backwards to accommodate their backward, barbaric system of chattel slavery. And they weren't going to do it. And who was supporting the slave owners? The British Empire, right? The British Empire needed that cheap cotton from the plantations, right? The British Empire, and also Wall Street. Wall Street, before there was a stock market there was an insurance place, and they would insure the ships. They did insurance for the ships that were shipping that cheap cotton to Britain. And so the British, textile capitalists with their satanic mills, that's what, it was called in the poem by William Blake, the satanic mills. Those satanic mills needed to be filled up with cheap cotton from the South. And so the British Empire almost sent their navy to support the slaveholders. But then the Russians sent their navy to New York City. Did you know that? The Russians sent their navy to New York City and docked their fleet in the harbor, saying that if the British got involved in the American Civil War, the Russians would get involved. The Russians supported Abraham Lincoln against the slaveholders. The British Empire supported supported slavery, and the Russian Empire at the time supported Abraham Lincoln, right? Every time, let me just say this, every time it's been a real serious fight for America, Russia has been on our side. Did you know that? I'm just telling you the truth. In the American Revolution, did you know the Russians were on our side? In the American Revolution in 1776, when we were fighting for our independence from the British, the Russians were on our side. That's right. And in fact, John Paul Jones, who was the top Navy captain, he went and became a Russian Navy captain because the relationship between the Russians and the American Revolution was so close. In the Civil War, the Russians sent their Navy to dock in New York City to help defeat the slaveholders. They're fighting against slavery. The Russians were on our side. World War II, we're fighting the Nazis, we're fighting the Japanese fascists. And who was on our side? The Russians. Hating Russia is a British Empire thing, right? That's the Atlanticist pathology. Russia it's an industrial country. It's got a lot of farmland. It's landlocked. It's got a lot of different nationalities, a lot of different cultures. Deep down in our bones, we Americans are a lot like Russians. Did you know that? Right? They're just like here in the United States, we've got Americans from all over the world. We got Americans who are Italian. We've got African Americans, Asian Americans, Latino Americans. You go to, the Russians. There's Russians from Siberia. There's Siberians. There's Russians. There's Estonians and Latvians. And I mean, it's, the nationalities. There's Chechens, but they're all one country, right? That's very similar. Right? The big, huge amounts of farmland. Russia has the biggest harvests in the world now, I believe. A huge farming boom. We've got farmland all over the United States. They got farmland, right? I mean, in a lot of ways, we're culturally closer to the Russians, right? A lot of different peoples here in the United States, but we're all one country. A lot of industry, a lot of agriculture. We're not an Atlanticist country. We're not. Og the Destroyer on Taiwan. Okay. We're not an Atlanticist country by any means. And that's why they're trying to collapse the United States into New York City and Southern California. So they can make the United States just a trade hub in their global empire. But there's a whole country here they're going to have to mess with. There's a lot of working people in Kansas and Idaho and Pennsylvania and Ohio and Florida and Texas and Georgia. There's white Americans, there's black Americans, there's brown Americans, there's Asian Americans, there's Arab Americans all over this country who are saying, no, we're not going to accept you collapsing the United States into being just another trading hub in your global empire. We're not going to accept you collapsing this country into two cities, New York City and Los Angeles. We're not going to accept you, basically wiping out and nullifying and canceling the entire country. We are going to be an industrial country. We are going to flourish. We're going to wipe out poverty. We're going to make scientific breakthroughs. We're going to pave new roads. We're going to conquer fusion energy. We are not going to just dissolve into your Atlanticist global order. We are going to be a country. We are going to break free. And ultimately, that is what will bring socialism to the United States. The broad masses of Americans are refusing to accept the Atlanticist pathology. We don't want to be a British Empire country. We're not part of the Commonwealth, right? We're not part of the Adam Smith free trade global system. That's not who we are. And they want to dissolve the United States into their global empire. Not without a fight you ain't. Not without a fight you ain't. And we've been taking it on the nose since the Reagan years with the cutbacks and the anti-union legislation and the dropping living standards and the prison industrial complex. But we're getting ready to resist. America is waking up. We are waking up the workers and the farmers of this country, the real America. The real America is ready to start fighting back against racism, against segregation, against wars. We are going to fight back and we are going to win. And deep down in our souls, we're a lot like the Russians. We're a lot like the Chinese people. And we are not like the British Empire, right? We are not like the British Empire. We're not like the free trade psychopaths that dominate the global economy. We're not. We're a people. We love each other. We love our children. We love our families. We love our communities. We are full of love in our hearts. We're not cold, sadistic British imperialists, gunning down African villages. That's not who we are as a people. Right? We've done evil things in the past. Sure, there's a lot of evil in this country. When it gets down to it, we Americans are not Atlanticists. Deep in our souls, we are not an Atlanticist country. We might believe in progress. We might believe in hard work. We might believe in optimism in the American dream. But we're not Atlanticists. We reject Atlanticism. We believe in love. We believe in brotherhood and solidarity, helping your neighbor, win-win cooperation. That's who we are as a people, and that will prevail. And the Atlanticist pathology will be purged from this country. The cancer of libertarian free trade economics, of radical individualism, will be purged from the United States of America. We will be reborn on new values of solidarity, kindness, brotherhood, sisterhood. We are going to be something different. We are going to be something different. The Atlanticist pathology will be defeated in the United States of America. We defeated it in 1776. We defeated the Atlanticist pathology in 1864, and we're going to defeat it. We defeated it during World War II, and the city-building tendency among the American people will awaken. The Abraham Lincoln, Roosevelt, John Brown, Harriet Tubman, the William Z. Foster, Gus Hall tendency of the American people will be successful and will emerge once again. And we're going to realize that we have far more in common with the Russians, with the Iranians, with the Chinese, far more in common with them than we have with the big banks at the London Stock Exchange, than we do with Jeffrey Sachs, than we do with the Rockefellers and the Carnegies and the DuPonts and the Morgans. No, deep down, we American people are not Atlanticists, right? And NATO is falling apart. So there you go. Hazel like that. Hazel like it. I'm sure somebody else will hate it. But there you go. Someone said their grandparents in Arkansas had a cross burned in their yard because they were nice to a black man. Yeah, that's the horror. That's the horror of the Ku Klux Klan and racism. And the worst thing about it was the Democratic Party that built the Ku Klux Klan. The Democratic Party, the Ku Klux Klan was largely a maneuver, a Bonapartist maneuver by Woodrow Wilson, because largely the Republican Party was the party of small farmers and rural folks, and the Democrats were the party of the urban political machines. And so the Ku Klux Klan was a maneuver. It was an attempt to build a political counter gang by Woodrow Wilson to recruit rural small farmers and folks like that to become Democrats and to become his foot soldiers. And part of that was the mythology of the Confederacy and getting the Ku Klux Klan of the 20s was mainly not in the South; it was in the Midwest, and it was about convincing small farmers that the South had been good before, and that slavery had somehow been good for white people, and the Republican Party had sold out the white man, and it was a maneuver to try and build a Bonapartist right-wing counter gang among white rural workers, and it was very successful. The Ku Klux Klan was very, very successful, but the Democratic Party, the urban machines, were largely Roman Catholic and hated the Ku Klux Klan, and so the Klan and the urban political machines battled with each other for control of the Democratic Party. That was the 1920s, largely. The 1920s, the Democratic Party was torn between the Ku Klux Klan on the one hand and the urban political machines on the other, right? Al Smith was Roman Catholic, and the Ku Klux Klan, voted Republican to make sure he didn't get elected. Because he was a Democrat, but he was Roman Catholic. And the Ku Klux Klan, they were having national rallies against Columbus Day because he was a Roman Catholic. And the Ku Klux Klan was a political maneuver, the second Klan. The first Klan was in Tennessee, and that was former Confederates, trying to keep black people from voting, largely, and retaliating against black people and against, people associated with the North. But the second Ku Klux Klan was in the 20s, the 1920s, and it was a maneuver by Woodrow Wilson and the Democratic Party. So there you go. And it was largely, well, that's a whole other story. Anyway, it was defeated. People talk about Superman comics were key in defeating the Ku Klux Klan. During World War II, the Ku Klux Klan, because a lot of them were admirers of Hitler, was a threat to national security. So the FBI infiltrated the Klan and then started leaking the Ku Klux Klan's secret passwords and code words, started leaking them to the Superman radio show. And they had episodes of the Superman radio show that everyone listened to where Superman fought the Ku Klux Klan. And all the same passwords and code words, and part of the reason people joined the Ku Klux Klan was they wanted the experience, like the game, right? They wanted to have the secret codes and the passwords and the secret handshakes and all of that. And so by leaking the actual secrets of the Ku Klux Klan onto the radio, so that all these kids knew all their secret code words and all their passwords, it was hugely demoralizing. All the KKK people thought they were so special because they became a knight of the invisible empire, and they were an exalted cyclops, and they knew a secret handshake, and they'd work so hard to get so high up in the Klan, and then they'd turn on the radio, and then on the next episode of Superman, the secret password they just learned was revealed, and everyone knows it. And it just kind of demoralized them, right? The appeal of being a Klansman was this stupid Tom Sawyer ritual crap, this mystical, I'm a knight in a castle and I know a secret password and all of that. So all you had to do was kind of reveal their secrets on the internet. There was no internet, on the radio, and that kind of demoralized them. That was kind of the end of the second Ku Klux Klan. They were already, in the 1930s, they were already kind of in decline, but that was kind of, speaking of Superman, opinions on American comics. All right. So that's kind of an interesting story. It goes to show that, well, that's a whole nother thing, but, some of that secrecy stuff, some of that LARPy secrecy where you got your decoder rings and your fake names, some of the communist groups engage in that, and it's juvenile, and it's stupid. And, come on. The government is listening to your phone. The government is reading your emails. I'm sorry. The second you become a person of interest, they start recording all your personal information. Don't think for a minute that if you play this silly game and, the government's not going to know who you are. And a lot of times that, that elaborate, ritual secret stuff that communist groups do, it actually has the opposite effect. I think it makes them easier to manipulate and to infiltrate. Kind of feeds into a paranoia that makes these groups dysfunctional. And I argue that no one should be engaging in any illegal activity at this time. No one should be. We should be engaging in a campaign of socialist education, teaching people basic Marxist principles, not engaging in a silly silly, pretend we're, secret revolutionary underground militias or something, Grow up, people. Seriously, grow up. And it's really sad. It's one thing to see like 13-year-olds LARPing, but when you see these boomers that are like, they got their secret party name and all that, grow up. Come on. Come on. Really? Really? How long have you been doing this and you got a secret party name and you got a secret party password and you got the secret hand? Come on. Really? Grow up. Grow up. Come on. Come on. Come on. All right. Okay. How do I talk to my coworker who is still acting as if Donald Trump is president? It might be good, right? So you don't like Donald Trump. Okay. Obviously, you don't like Donald Trump, but your coworker does. And your coworker probably feels like he's against the system because he's defending somebody that mainstream media doesn't like. So maybe a good place to start the conversation. You don't have to pretend you like Donald Trump. I wouldn't do that. But talk about why mainstream media didn't like Donald Trump. And bond with him over that. And talk about some of the stuff Donald Trump said that was good. And show him that you're not a Democratic Party shill. You're not a Rachel Maddow triggered liberal. That you're like, hey, Donald Trump said we were going to stop toppling regimes. I thought that was pretty cool. And, and get him to, show him that you're not just a regular liberal. And admit why the mainstream media was out to get Trump and say that you understand that. And then start to gradually engage with what these wars are really about and who this ruling class really is. And maybe with QAnon, talk about, what is proven with Jeffrey Epstein and such. Do you see the US-EU split coming? Right? Okay. US-EU split / EU split. Oh boy, it's going to be a long one tonight. Anyway, next question. You don't drink. What are your views on drugs? Well, look, I'm not opposed. How the Dems moved from the KKK from what we have. All right, Dems, KKK to today. All right. So I don't drink and I don't do drugs. When I was a teenager, I was really fascinated by drug culture. And I was, that scared the crap out of my parents. And, I don't know, my parents were kind of, I don't know, whatever. But, I never actually did any drugs. I didn't have much of a social life. My parents didn't let me go to parties or, do anything when I was a teenager, basically. So because they were very restrictive of what I could do, I never really had the opportunity to use drugs. But, as I got more into communism, I saw that communist groups didn't use drugs either. And I respected that. I read about CIA use of drugs and all of that. And so I didn't use drugs. But drinking, I drank. In college, I drank. I've been drunk before and all of that. And, the problem is, you all, my voice is very nasally, right? I'm a very nasal person. I struggle not to speak through my nose. And I struggle to speak with my full voice because I'm very nasally. And for some reason, my mouth is always very dry. And I drink a lot of water. I'm constantly drinking water. And, so I'm always dry. Alcohol dries me out. And also there's certain, sometimes it's the sugar, there's the tannins or whatever. It depends what the alcoholic drink is. Some alcohol, not only does it dry me out, but it immediately gives me a headache. And so whenever I would drink alcohol, it was a risk. Sometimes I would drink alcohol and it would feel great. And it would be fine. And sometimes I would drink alcohol and I would feel great. And then I would wake up the next morning and be sick. And sometimes I would drink alcohol, and the first sip, I immediately get a headache and I'm in pain. So, I remember one time, it was on the 4th of July, it got to be 3-4 years ago now. I went to the movies with my wife. There's a movie theater in downtown Brooklyn that you can go to that has their liquor license. You can get alcohol in the movie theater. So I thought, I'm just going to relax and watch the movie. So I ordered a glass of white wine with the movie. And so the credits for the movie came up, the opening credits, and my glass of white wine was in front of me. And I drank the first sip, and immediately my head started hurting. Just immediately, there was like pain in my head. And I thought, oh, God, why? Why do I do this to myself? And so that was the last time I ever drank alcohol. Because I just thought, what's the point, right? I mean, there's some, people drink and they get into fights, and people drink and they, act stupid, and it's very expensive, especially in New York City. You buy an alcoholic drink, and I thought, on top of that, it might make me sick the next day. It might make me sick right now. Why do it? And so I just don't drink anymore. And that's it. I just don't drink alcohol. I don't. I think in Russia one time I was out with some people and I had a shot just, because, they're into vodka in Russia. And I'm not morally opposed to drinking, but I just don't do it anymore. But I think it is possible to drink responsibly. And the same with weed. I've never done weed, but I know some people who are able to just smoke weed occasionally, right? Again, there are things that are chemically addictive, like heroin and cocaine. And then there's like habit forming, right? With alcohol, right? Alcohol is not technically addictive, but there are people who become alcoholics. They become dependent on it, right? And that's psychological, right? Weed is not technically chemically addictive, but there are people who become dependent on it. And so my attitude is that for the revolution and for being politically serious, one should try to refrain from getting fucked up, right? If you want to relax sometime, go have a party and drink with a friend or something, that's your business, right? I don't do that anymore. But for the most part, we should try to be alert, and we should try to be professional. We should try to be serious. And the same goes for, frivolous, sexual behavior, right? I mean, obviously people have sex lives and their own sex life is their business. But, if everyone's screwing everybody else, especially in a revolutionary organization, that can lead to all kinds of drama, right? Where hearts are broken and people are jealous and people are angry. And, to some degree or other, I'm not going to tell people how to live their sex life. But, if everyone's having sex with everybody else, pretty soon there's going to be some problems. There's going to be some problems. And so, I'm for being modest, for being modest. My outlook toward life is that one should be modest, right? Be modest, and things like this. That's my attitude, right? I'm not imposing strict rules, but be modest. And, and when it comes to drugs, marijuana, whatever, it's mostly legal now. And again, some people can use it fine, but anything harder than that, heroin, LSD, cocaine, stay away from that stuff. Stay away from that stuff. So there you go. How do you feel about the IRA as an Irish American? Well, there's multiple IRAs. Okay, so there's the Irish Republican Army that created Ireland, and then there's the provisional Irish Republican Army that was the wing of Sinn Féin, Bobby Sands, and all of that. And now there's a couple groups. There's the Real IRA, Continuity IRA. I would say that, that obviously Ireland fighting for its freedom in the 1920s was a good thing. Obviously, the 1960s, the Irish people in Northern Ireland fighting for their communities and for socialism was a good thing. But the groups that are on the ground now doing stuff don't have a mass base. That Sinn Féin, despite the fact that Sinn Féin, the Irish Nationalist Party, it has become very moderate, and it is not the revolutionary force it once was. That said, these other groups, these small little groups, they don't have a mass base for what they're doing. And that no one should be engaging in armed struggle in Ireland at this point because that's not where the people are at. The Irish population is not in favor of armed struggle. So the current IRA groups, I think they're wrong. Sinn Féin is the main current that represents the Irish people's national liberation aspirations right now. And Sinn Féin, unfortunately, in some ways it's good. It's supportive of Venezuela. Sinn Féin is, and it's also supportive of the Palestinians. But in some ways, modern Sinn Féin is pretty reformist and social democratic. But that said, that's where the broad masses of Irish people are, is there with Sinn Féin, and those other groups don't have a mass base. Those other groups, they don't really have a mass base. And there are communists in Sinn Féin who want to push it in a more revolutionary direction. And, every so often Sinn Féin gets, they go on a limb. They sent people to Maduro's inauguration, and that caused a huge stir. But they did it because they support Maduro. They call out Israel all the time and support the Palestinians. I mean, that they're not afraid to do that. So Sinn Féin, it's a mixed, it's mixed, but overall, no one should be engaging in armed struggle at this time. Right? The armed struggle groups in Ireland don't really have a mass base, and it's ultra left stuff that enables state repression. I'm for freeing all political prisoners. For a while, I think Marilyn Price was being held. She was somebody they accused of being with one of those groups. I'm for her being free. Free all political prisoners, blanket amnesty. So there you go. Chinese movies that you recommend. One movie I learned a lot from was called The Beginning of the Great Revival. And I think it's called The Founding of a Party in China. It's about the founding Congress, the Chinese Communist Party. I thought it was pretty neat movie. Another movie that I've enjoyed from China, it's from the Cultural Revolution. It's called Breaking with Old Ideas. It's really kind of a fun movie. It's about a guy who starts a medical college in the countryside and is teaching, peasants how to become medical doctors. And it's a cultural revolution film. And at one point, the students in the school rise up against the teachers for being revisionists or something. It's a pretty good movie, and it gives you kind of an insight into the Cultural Revolution and their aspects. Breaking with Old Ideas. I think you can watch it on YouTube. It's like a Cultural Revolution era film from the early 70s, I think. There you go. Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Well, that's a movie from the 1930s. The villain is Taylor, right? Mr. Taylor, and he runs a corrupt political machine. And Jimmy Stewart plays this everyman who, Jimmy Stewart, who, oh, gee there, Mr. Senator, I don't know what to do there. I'm just a member of the Congress now, and I want to build a summer camp for these here young kids, and they can pay for it with their nickels. And it's an exciting movie about an average Joe who ends up in Congress and fights for the common man. It's so corrupt here. It's like a political machine. You don't care about the people. And I'm Jimmy Stewart, and I'm given a filibuster until I can't, and then he passes out, and it's Roosevelt era, kind of a populist Roosevelt era film, right? And a lot of the films of the 30s and even up into the 50s, a lot of Hollywood movies were progressive, kind of. There you go. All right. What does Og the Destroyer think about Taiwan? Og no like China. Og no like China. Og want break up China. Og hate China. Thank you, Mr. Og the Destroyer, for spreading your enlightened message of human rights and freedom. And that's Og the Destroyer. What do you think of American comics? Did you know that Congress investigated comics? Did you know that? The House Un-American Activities Committee during the 1950s investigated comics because they thought they were pornographic and they were spreading communist messages. Superman was the man of steel, just like Stalin. And there was an investigation into the comic books and their subversive ideas. They made a funny movie a couple years ago about the origin of the Wonder Woman comic books. I think it was called Mr. Marston and the Wonder Women. And it was really amusing because I guess the man who wrote the Wonder Woman comics was he was like a feminist and like a psychology professor, and he had some theories about women and their reasoning and how women reasoned different than men and they were more socially intelligent. And he was also apparently the original comic books of Wonder Woman are full of BDSM, dominatrix kind of stuff, apparently. And it was kind of an amusing movie. I mean, it starts out with the FBI is investigating the Wonder Woman comics, so they interview the guy who wrote them. And then you get the backstory of how he came to write the Wonder Woman comics. And he was this, sexually promiscuous, feminist college professor or something. It was an amusing movie, Mr. Marston and the Wonder Women or something. Superman was progressive. I argue that Batman is conservative. And that the comic books, because, it was a different time and, especially they were starting out in the 1930s, Superman especially has populist images in it. And, and Wonder Woman was certainly, scandalous and filled with, oddly BDSM-y and, sadomasochistic, but also feminist kind of, content. And, they were cutting edge, right? It was, the world was changing in the 30s. The Soviet Union existed, and McCarthyism hadn't come in yet. McCarthyism was kind of a rollback on social progress in a lot of ways. And, so it was kind of representative of the times. I mean, and they were trying to sell stuff. They were trying to make money. And so that's one thing. Hollywood, comic books, they're never afraid to kind of push the limits of social conservatism. Never afraid to do that, right? They're always willing to do that. Loved your opening remarks. Keep the good work. Well, thank you, Severio. I do appreciate that. Thank you very much. The U.S. UE split. Oh yeah, with Britain out of the EU, I see the distance between the European mainland and the United States getting bigger every day. There's been tension. France, nuclear power, and now Russia. Russia is selling natural gas to Germany, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I see the split getting closer every day. How did the Democrats get from the KKK to today? Well, they're still the party of the urban political machines. That's pretty clear. Roosevelt came in. It was like a populist who was aligned with the labor movement. So Roosevelt, he was a Democrat, and that's when the Democrats started, to hint they might be friendly to civil rights. And then after World War II, the Republicans were, the more conservative party, attacking the Democrats for being soft on communism. And so then the northern wing of the Democratic Party, the Kennedy family and others, started supporting the civil rights movement. And so you had kind of a fight in the Democratic Party between the solid South and the urban political machines. And ultimately the South went to the Republicans, and the urban political machines largely became, what they are today. One thing that's consistent with the Democratic Party from the time it started all the way up to now, it started with Thomas Jefferson and the Tammany Hall machine of New York City, all the way up to today. Democrats have always been the party that is more corrupt, and they are the party of urban political machines and corruption. They have always been that. Now, at different points, they were also at one point the party of the slave owners of the South, and then they were the party of the Jim Crow folks. They were the party of the Ku Klux Klan. They've always been the party of urban political machines. Republicans have always been the party of rural people in the Midwest, small farmers, etc. And still today, Republicans, red states tend to be rural states, small farmers, that's, people in rural areas, right? And the Democrats are the party of the corrupt urban political machines. And that's really, that lineup is pretty consistent, except for the South, right? The South was with the Democrats. Now the South is Republican. So throw the South out. But other than that, the two parties have consistently been that. It's just in the age of Lincoln, the small farmers were the progressives, right? They were against slavery. They were, they had the populist movement, and they were aligned with organized labor. And, the small farmers were kind of progressive, radical left-wing forces. Nowadays, not so much, but, there you go. All right, folks, that is our stream for tonight. I never sang you the song, did you? All right, fine. A song in honor of Jason Unruhe. And it's to the tune of I Am a Good Old Rebel, right, which is a Confederate song. I'm not going to sing that song for you, or people will think I'm a Confederate, a neo-Confederate. But it's to the tune of a Confederate song called I'm a Good Old Rebel. So I am a Maoist rebel, and that's just what I am. For actually changing things, I do not give a damn. I'd rather smoke some weed and play some Fallout 2. But you know that I'm the vanguard with my stupid hairdo. One more time. I am a Maoist rebel, and that's just what I am. But to actually change things, I do not give a damn. I'd rather smoke some weed and play some Fallout 2. You know that I'm the vanguard with my stupid hairdo. There you go. That's the song. That's the song, folks. There you go. All right, folks. And now we end. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression, but the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night, everybody, and have a good night. I'm having fun. I love all of you. This is a great community here. It really is. Isn't this great? Isn't this amazing? Isn't this amazing, this community we have on these lives? I love it. I really love it. I love being able to get on here and joke with all of you and talk with all of you and talk. This is awesome. This is amazing. This is just tremendous. It's amazing. Revolution is the main trend in the world today. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Good night, everybody.